Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Here you will hear Elijah Muhammad introduced by Minister Malcolm X, the Muslims' New York leader and ambassador at large for the movement. The good news that Minister X talks about here is the coming rise of the black man and the fall of the white man.
Everyone who is here today realizes that we are now living in the fulfillment of prophecy. Right. We have come to hear and to see the greatest and the wisest and most fearless black man in America today. Right. In the church, we used to sing the song, "Good news, the chariot is coming." Is that right or wrong? But what we must bear in mind, that what's good news to one person is bad news to another. While you sit here today, knowing that you have come to hear good news, you must realize in advance what's good news for you might be bad news for somebody else. Right. What's good news for the sheep might be bad news to the wolf.
The good news for the black man is that he is on the verge of recapturing his position as ruler of the universe. The bad news for the white man is that his long and wicked reign will shortly be over. And following this introduction, Elijah Muhammad, leader of the Muslims, speaks.
The Christian religion has failed. Your leaders of that religion has failed. Right there, now the government of America has failed you. You have no justice coming from no one. Right.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, March 27th, 2015. So I have been told. This is our 7th study session on the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley, our narrator, Mr. Earl Hyman. The audio segment you heard at the beginning, a short clip from the documentary production, The Hate That Hate Produced. Minister Malcolm referenced that during last week's session. We're in the middle of chapter 14. He continues to reference the impact and racist motivation for producing that film during this week's segment. We will go ahead and get started. Again, we are in the middle of chapter 14, narrated by Earl Hyman, Context of White Supremacy.
Dr. C. Eric Lincoln's book was published amid widening controversy about us Muslims at just about the time we were starting to put on our first big mass rallies. Just as the television Hate That Hate Produced title had projected that hate-teaching image of us, now Dr. Lincoln's book was titled The Black Muslims in America. The press snatched at that name. Black Muslims was in all the book reviews, which quoted from the book only what was critical of us and generally praised Dr. Lincoln's writing. The public mind fixed on black Muslims. From Mr. Muhammad on down, the name black Muslims distressed everyone in the Nation of Islam. I tried for at least 2 years to kill off that black Muslims. Every newspaper and magazine writer and microphone I got close to. No, we are black people here in America. Our religion is Islam. We are properly called Muslims, but that black Muslim's name never got dislodged. Our mass rallies from the very beginning were astounding successes. Where once Detroit's struggling little Temple 1 proudly sent a 10-automobile caravan to Chicago to hear Mr. Muhammad, now, from East Coast temples, the older temples as well as the new ones that all of the massive publicity had helped to bring into being, as many as 150, 200, and even as many as 300 big chartered buses rolled the highways to wherever Mr. Muhammad was going to speak. On each bus, 2 Fruit of Islam men were in charge. Big 3-by-9-foot painted canvas banners hung on the bus's sides to be read by the highway traffic and thousands of people at home and on the sidewalks of the towns the buses passed through. Hundreds more Muslims and curious Negroes drove their own cars, and Mr. Muhammad with his personal jet plane from Chicago. From the airport to the rally hall, Mr. Muhammad's motorcade had a siren-screaming police escort. Law agencies once had scoffed at our nation as black crackpots. Now they took special pains to safeguard against some white crackpots causing any incidents or accidents. America had never seen such fantastic all-black meetings. To hear Elijah Muhammad, up to 10,000 and more black people poured from public and private transportation to overflow the big halls we rented, such as the St. Nicholas Arena in New York City, Chicago's Coliseum, and Washington, D.C.'s Uline Arena. The white man was barred from attendance. The first time the American black man had ever dreamed of such a thing. And that brought us new attacks from the white man and his black puppets. Black segregationists, racists, accusing us of segregation. Across America, whites barring blacks was standard. Many hundreds arrived too late for us to seat them. We always had to wire up outside loudspeakers. An electric atmosphere excited the great shifting masses of black people. The long lines, 3 and 4 abreast, funneling to the meeting hall, were kept in strict order by Fruit of Islam men communicating by walkie-talkie. In anterooms just inside the halls, more Fruit of Islam men and white-gowned, veiled, mature Muslim sisters thoroughly searched every man, woman, and child seeking to enter. Any alcohol and tobacco had to be checked, and any objects which could possibly be used to attempt to harm Mr. Muhammad. He always seemed deathly afraid that someone would harm him, and he insisted that everyone be searched to forestall this. Today I understand better why. The hundreds of Fruit of Islam men represented contingents which had arrived early that morning from their temples in the nearest cities. Some were detailed as ushers, who seated the people by designated sections. The balconies in the rear half of the main floor were filled with black people of the general public. Ahead of them were the all-Muslim seating sections, the white-garbed, beautiful black sisters, and the dark-suited, white-shirted brothers. A special section near the front was for black so-called dignitaries. Many of these had been invited. Among them were our black puppet and parrot attackers, the intellectuals and professional Negroes over whom Mr. Muhammad grieved so much. For these were the educated ones who should have been foremost in leading their poor black brothers out of the maze of misery and want. We wanted them to miss not a single syllable of the truths from Mr. Muhammad in person. The front 2 or 3 press rows were filled with the black reporters and cameramen representing the Negro press, or those who had been hired by the white man's newspapers, magazines, radio, and television. America's black writers should hold a banquet for Mr. Muhammad. Writing about the Nation of Islam was the path to success for most of the black writers who now are recognized. Upon the speaker's platform, we ministers and other officials of the nation, entering from backstage, found ourselves chairs in the 5 or 6 rows behind the big chair reserved for Mr. Muhammad. Some of the ministers had come hundreds of miles to be present. we would be turning about in our chairs, beaming with smiles, wringing each other's hands and exchanging As-salamu alaykum and Wa alaykum salam in our genuine deep rejoicing to see each other again. Always, meeting us older hands in Mr. Muhammad's service for the first time, there were several new ministers of small new temples. My brothers Wilfred and Filbert were respectively now the ministers of the Detroit and Lansing temples. Minister Jeremiah X headed Atlanta's temple. Minister John X had Los Angeles temple. The messenger's son, Minister Wallace Muhammad, had the Philadelphia temple. Minister Woodrow X had the Atlantic City temple. Some of our ministers had unusual backgrounds. The Washington, D.C. temple Minister Lucius X was previously a Seventh-day Adventist and a 32nd degree Mason. Minister George X of the Camden, New Jersey temple was a pathologist. Minister David X was previously the minister of a Richmond, Virginia Christian church. He and enough of his congregation had become Muslims so that the congregation split and the majority turned the church into our Richmond temple. The Boston temple's outstanding young minister Louis X, previously a well-known and rising popular singer called The Charmer, had written our nation's popular first song titled White Man's Heaven is Black Man's Hell. Minister Louis X had also authored our first play, Orgina, a Negro spelled backwards. Its theme was the all-black trial of a symbolic white man for his world crimes against non-whites. Found guilty, sentenced to death, he was dragged off shouting about all he had done for the Negro people. Younger even than our talented Louis X were some newer ministers, Minister Thomas J. X of the Hartford Temple being one example, and another the Buffalo Temple's Minister Robert J. X. I'd either originally established or organized for Mr. Muhammad most of the represented temples. Greeting each of these temples' brother ministers would bring back into my mind images of fishing for converts along the streets and from door to door wherever the black people were congregated. I remembered the countless meetings in living rooms where maybe 7 would be a crowd, the gradually building, on up to renting folding chairs for dingy little storefronts which Muslims scrubbed to spotlessness. We together on a huge hall-speaking platform, and that vast audience before us miraculously manifested, as far as I was concerned, the incomprehensible power of Allah. For the first time, I truly understood something Mr. Muhammad had told me. He claimed that when he was going through the sacrificial trials of fleeing the black hypocrites from city to city, Allah had often sent him visions of great audiences who would one day hear the teachings. And Mr. Muhammad said the visions also buoyed him when he was locked up for years in the white man's prison. The great audience's restless whisperings would cease. At the microphone would be the nation's national secretary, John Ali, or the Boston Temple minister, Louis X. They enlivened the all-black atmosphere, speaking of the new world open to the black man through the Nation of Islam. Sister Tainetta Dainier would speak beautifully of the Muslim women's powerful, vital contributions, of the Muslim women's roles in our nation's efforts to raise the physical, mental, moral, social, and political condition of America's black people. Next, I would come to the microphone, specifically to condition the audience to hear Mr. Muhammad, who had flown from Chicago to teach us all in person. I would raise up my hand. As-alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam. It was a roared response from the great audience's Muslim seating section. There was a general pattern that I would follow on these occasions. My black brothers and sisters, of all religious beliefs, or of no religious beliefs, we all have in common the greatest binding tie we could have. We all are black people. I'm not going to take all day telling you some of the greatnesses of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I'm just going to tell you now his greatest greatness. He is the first, the only black leader to identify to you and me who is our enemy. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the first black leader among us with the courage to tell us, out here in public, something which when you begin to think of it back in your homes, you will realize we black people have been living with, we have been seeing, we have been suffering all of our lives. Our enemy is the white man. And why is Mr. Muhammad's teaching us this such a great thing? Because when you know who your enemy is, he can no longer keep you divided and fighting, one brother against the other. Because when you recognize who your enemy is, he can no longer use trickery, promises, lies, hypocrisy, and his evil acts to keep you deaf, dumb, and blinded. When you recognize who your enemy is, he can no longer brainwash you. He can no longer pull wool over your eyes so that you never stop to see that you are living in pure hell on this earth, while he lives in pure heaven right on this same earth. This enemy who tells you that you are both supposed to be worshiping the same white Christian God that you are told stands for the same things for all men. Oh yes, that devil is our enemy. I'll prove it. Pick up any daily newspaper. Read the false charges leveled against our beloved religious leader. It only points up the fact that the Caucasian race never wants any black man who is not their puppet or parrot to speak for our people. This Caucasian devil's slave master does not want or trust us to leave him, yet when we stay here among him, he continues to keep us at the very lowest level of his society. The white man has always loved it when he could keep us black men tucked away somewhere, always out of sight, around the corner. The white man has always loved the kind of black leaders whom he could ask, "Well, how's things with your people up there?" But because Mr. Elijah Muhammad takes an uncompromising stand with the white man hates him. When you hear the white man hate him, you too, because you don't understand biblical prophecy, wrongly label Mr. Muhammad as a racist, a hate teacher, or of being anti-white and teaching black supremacy. The audience suddenly would begin a rustling of turning. Mr. Muhammad would be rapidly moving along up a center aisle from the rear, as once he had entered our humble little mosques. This man whom we regarded as Islam's gentle, meek, brown-skinned lamb. Stalwart, striding, close-cropped, hand-picked fruit of Islam guards were a circle surrounding him. He carried his holy Bible, his holy Koran. The small, dark pillbox atop his head was gold-embroidered with Islam's flag, the sun, moon, and stars. The Muslims were crying out their adoration and their welcome. "Little lamb, as-alaikum salam, praise be to Allah." Tears would be in more eyes than mine. He had rescued me when I was a convict. Mr. Muhammad had trained me in his home as if I was his son. I think that my life's peaks of emotion, until recently at least, were when suddenly the fruit of Islam guards would stop stiffly at attention, and the platform's several steps would be mounted alone by Mr. Muhammad, and his ministers, including me, sprang around him, embracing him, wringing both his hands. I would turn right back to the microphone, not to keep waiting those world's biggest black audiences who had come to hear him. My black brothers and sisters, no one will know who we are until we know who we are. We never will be able to go anywhere until we know where we are. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is giving us a true identity and a true position, the first time they have ever been known to the American black man. You can be around this man and never dream from his actions the power and the authority he has. Behind me, believe me when I tell you, I could feel Mr. Muhammad's power. He does not display and parade his power, but no other black leader in America has followers who will lay down their lives if he says so. And I don't mean all of this non-violent, begging the white man kind of dying, all of this sitting in, sliding in, wading in, eating in, diving in, and all the rest. My black brothers and sisters, you have come from your homes to hear. Now you are going to hear America's wisest black man, America's boldest black man, America's most fearless black man, this wilderness of North America's most powerful black man. Mr. Muhammad would come quickly to the stand, looking out over the vacuum-quiet audience, his gentle-looking face set for just a fleeting moment. Then, as-alaikum salam, wa alaikum salam. The Muslims roared it as they settled to listen. From experience, they knew that for the next 2 hours, Mr. Muhammad would wield his two-edged sword of truth. In fact, every Muslim worried that he overtaxed himself in the length of his speeches, considering his bronchial asthmatic condition. I don't have a degree like many of you out there before me have, but history don't care anything about your degrees. The white man, he has filled you with a fear of him from ever since you were little black babies. So over you is the greatest enemy a man can have, and that is fear. I know some of you are afraid to listen to the truth. You've been raised on fear and lies. But I'm going to preach to you the truth until you are free of that fear. Your slave master, he brought you over here, and of your past everything was destroyed. Today you do not know your true language. What tribe are you from? You would not recognize your tribe's name if you heard it. You don't know nothing about your true culture. You don't even know your family's real name. You are wearing a white man's name, the white slave master who hates you. You are a people who think you know all about the Bible and all about Christianity. You even are foolish enough to believe that nothing is right but Christianity. You are the planet Earth's only group of people ignorant of yourself, ignorant of your own kind, of your true history, ignorant of your enemy. You know nothing at all but what your white slave master has chosen to tell you. And he has told you only that which will benefit himself and his own kind. He has taught you for his benefit that you are a neutral, shiftless, helpless, so-called Negro. I say so-called because you are not a Negro. There is no such thing as a race of Negroes. You are members of the Asiatic nation from the tribe of Shabazz. Negro is a false label forced on you by your slave master. He has been pushing things onto you and me and our kind ever since he brought the first slave shipload of us black people here. When Mr. Muhammad paused, the Muslims before him cried out, "Little lamb, all praise is due to Allah. Teach, messenger." He would continue. The ignorance we of the black race here in America have, and the self-hatred we have, they are fine examples of what the white slave master seen fit to teach to us. Do we show the plain common sense, like every other people on this planet Earth, to unite among ourselves? No, we are humbling ourselves, sitting in and begging in, trying to unite with the slave master. I don't seem able to imagine any more ridiculous sight. 1,000 ways every day the white man is telling you, you can't live here, you can't enter here, you can't eat here, drink here, walk here, work here, you can't ride here, you can't play here, you can't study here. Haven't we yet seen enough to see that he has no plan to unite with you? You have tilled his fields, cooked his food, washed his clothes. You've cared for his wife and children when he was away. In many cases you have even suckled him at your breast. You have been far and away better Christians than the slave master who taught you his Christianity. You have sweated blood to help him build a country so rich that he can today afford to give away millions, even to his enemies. And when those enemies have gotten enough from him to then be able to attack him, you have been his brave soldiers, dying for him. And you've been always his most faithful servant during the so-called peaceful times. And still, this Christian American white man has not got it in him to find the human decency and enough sense of justice to recognize us and accept us, the black people who have done so much for him, as fellow human beings. Yeah, man. Teach, messenger. Yeah, tell him, you right. Take your time up there, little messenger. Oh, yes. Others besides the Muslims would be shouting now. We Muslims were less extroverted than Christian Negroes. It would sound now like an old-fashioned camp meeting. So let us, the black people, separate ourselves from this white man slave master who despises us so much. You out here begging him for some so-called integration. But what is this slave master white rapist going about saying? He is saying he won't integrate because black blood will mongrelize his race. He says that. And look at us. Turn around in your seats and look at each other. This slave master white man already has integrated us until you can hardly find among us today any more than a very few who are the black color of our foreparents. God Almighty, the man's right. Teach, messenger. Hear him. Hear him. He has left such a little black in us, Mr. Muhammad would go on, that now he despises us so bad, meaning he despises himself for what he has done to us, that he tells us that legally, if we have got one drop of black blood in us, that means you are all black as far as his laws are concerned. Well, if that's all we've got left, we want to reclaim that one drop. Mr. Muhammad's frail strength could be seen to be waning, but he would teach on. So let us separate from this white man, and for the same reason he says, in time to save ourselves from any more integration. Why shouldn't this white man who likes to think and call himself so good and so generous, this white man who finances even his enemies, why shouldn't he subsidize a separate state, a separate territory, for we black people who have been such faithful slaves and servants, a separate territory on which we can lift ourselves out of these white man's slums for us, and his breadlines for us, and even for those he is complaining that we cost him too much. We can do something for ourselves. We never have done what we could, because we have been brainwashed so well by the slave master white man that we must come to him, begging him for everything we want and need. After perhaps 90 minutes, behind Mr. Muhammad, every minister would have to restrain himself from bolting up to his side to urge him that it was enough. He would be pressing his hands tightly against the edges of the speaker's stand to support himself. We black people don't know what we can do. You never can know what anything can do until it is set free to act by itself. If you have a cat in your house that you pamper and pet, you have to free that cat, set it on its own in the woods before you can see that the cat had it in him to shelter and feed itself. We, the black people here in America, we never have been free to find out what we really can do. We have knowledge and experience to pool to do for ourselves. All of our lives we have farmed. We can grow our own food. We can set up factories to manufacture our own necessities. We can build other kinds of businesses to establish trade and commerce and become independent as other civilized people are. We can throw off our brainwashing and our self-hate and live as brothers together. Some land of our own, something for ourselves. Leave this white slave master to himself. Mr. Muhammad always stopped abruptly when he was unable to speak any longer. The standing ovation, a solid wall of sound, would go on unabating. Standing up there, flailing my arms, finally I could quiet the audiences as Fruit of Islam ushers began to pass along the seating rows the large waxed paper buckets we used to take up the collection. I would speak. You know, from what you have just heard, that no white money finances the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his program to advise him and contain him. Mr. Muhammad's program and his followers are not integrated. Mr. Muhammad's program and organization are all black. We are the only black organization that only black people support. These so-called Negro Progress organizations, while they insult your intelligence, claiming they are fighting in your behalf to get you the equal rights you are asking for, claiming they are fighting the white man who refuses to give you your rights. Why, the white man supports those organizations. If you belong, you pay your $2 or $3 or $5 a year. But who gives those organizations those $2 and $3 and $5,000 donations? The white man. He feeds those organizations, so he controls those organizations. He advises them, so he contains them. Use your common sense. Aren't you going to advise and control and contain anyone that you support, like your child? The white man would love to support Mr. Elijah Muhammad, because if Mr. Muhammad had to rely on his support, he could advise Mr. Muhammad. My black brothers and sisters, it is only because your money, black money, supports Mr. Muhammad that he can hold these all-black meetings from city to city telling us black men the truth. That's why we're asking for your all-black support. Nearly all bills, and far from all $1 bills either, filled the waxed buckets. The buckets were swiftly emptied, then refilled as the Fruit of Islam ushers covered the entire audience. The audience atmosphere was almost as if the people had gone limp. The collections always covered the rally expenses, and anything beyond that helped to continue building the Nation of Islam. After several big rallies, Mr. Muhammad directed that we would admit the white press. Fruit of Islam men thoroughly searched them as everyone else was searched, their notebooks, their cameras, camera cases, and whatever else they carried. Later, Mr. Muhammad said that any whites who wanted to hear the truth could attend our public rallies until a small separate section for whites was filled. Most whites who came were students and scholars. I would watch their congealed and reddened faces staring up at Mr. Muhammad. The white man knows that his acts have been those of a devil. I would watch also the faces of the professional black men, the so-called intellectuals who attacked us. They possessed the academic know-how. They possessed the technical and the scientific skills that could help to lead their mass of poor black brothers out of our condition. But all these intellectual and professional black men could seem to think of was humbling themselves and begging, trying to integrate with the so-called liberal white man who was telling them, in time, everything's going to work out one day. Just wait and have patience. These intellectual and professional Negroes couldn't use what they knew for the benefit of their own black kind simply because even among themselves they were disunited. United among themselves, united with their own kind, they could have benefited black people all over the world. I would watch the faces of those intellectual and professional Negroes growing grave and set as the truth hit home to them. We were watched. Our telephones were tapped. Still right today, on my home telephone, if I said, I'm going to bomb the Empire State Building, I guarantee you in 5 minutes it would be surrounded. When I was speaking publicly sometimes, I'd guess which were FBI faces in the audience, or other types of agents. Both the police and the FBI intently and persistently visited and questioned us. I do not fear them, Mr. Muhammad said. I have all that I need. The truth. Many a night I drifted off to sleep, filled with wonder at how the two-edged sword teachings so hurt, confused, concerned, and upset the government full of men trained highly in all of the modern sciences. I felt that it never could have been unless the most learned one, Allah himself, had given the little fourth-grade trained messenger something. Black agents were sent to infiltrate us. But the white man's secret spy often proved, first of all, a black man. I can't say all of them, of course. There's no way to know. But some of them, after joining us and hearing, seeing, and feeling the truth for every black man, revealed their roles to us. Some resigned from the white man's agencies and came to work in the Nation of Islam. A few kept their jobs to counter-spy, telling us the white man's statements and plans about our nation. This was how we learned that after wanting to know what happened within our temples, the white law agency's second major concern was the thing that I believe still ranks today as a big worry among America's penologists, the steadily increasing rate at which black convicts embrace Islam. Generally, while still in prison, our convict converts precondition themselves to meet our nation's moral laws. As it had happened with me, when they left prison, they entered a temple fully qualified to become registered Muslims. In fact, convict converts usually were better prepared than were numerous prospective Muslims who never had been inside a prison. We were not nearly so easy to enter as a Christian church. One did not merely declare himself a follower of Mr. Muhammad, then continue leading the same old sinful, immoral life. The Muslim first had to change his physical and moral self to meet our strict rules. To remain a Muslim, he had to maintain those rules. Few temple meetings were held, for instance, without the minister looking down upon some freshly shaved, bald domes of new Muslim brothers in the audience. They had just banished from their lives forever that phony, lie-conked, metallic-looking hair, or the process, as some call it these days. It grieves me that I don't care where you go. You see this symbol of ignorance and self-hate on so many Negroes' heads. I know it's bound to hurt the feelings of some of my good conked non-Muslim friends. But if you study closely any conked or processed Negro, you usually find he is an ignorant Negro. Whatever show or front he affects, his hair, lie-cooked to be white-looking, fairly shouts to everyone who looks at his head, I'm ashamed to be a Negro. He will discover, just as I did, that he will be much improved mentally whenever he discovers enough black self-pride to have that mess clipped off, and then wear the natural hair that God gives black men to wear. No Muslim smokes. That was another of our rules. Some prospective Muslims found it more difficult to quit tobacco than others found quitting the dope habit. But black men and women quit more easily when we got them to consider seriously how the white man's government cared less about the public's health than about continuing the tobacco industry's billions in tax revenue. What does a serviceman pay for a carton of cigarettes? A prospective Muslim convert would be asked. It helped him to see that every regularly priced carton he bought meant that the white man's government took around $2 of a black man's hard-earned money for taxes, not for tobacco. You may have read somewhere, a lot has been written concerning it, about the Nation of Islam's phenomenal record of dope addiction cures of long-time junkies. In fact, the New York Times carried a story about how some of the social agencies have asked representatives of the Muslim program for clinical suggestions. The Muslim program began with recognizing that color and addiction have a distinct connection. It is no accident that in the entire Western Hemisphere, the greatest localized concentration of addicts is in Harlem. Our cure program's first major ingredient was the painfully patient work of Muslims who previously were junkies themselves. In the ghetto's dope jungle, the Muslim ex-junkies would fish out addicts who knew them back in those days. Then, with an agonizing patience that might span anywhere from a few months to a year, our ex-junkie Muslims would conduct the addicts through the Muslim 6-point therapeutic process. The addict first was brought to admit to himself that he was an addict. Secondly, he was taught why he used narcotics. Third, he was shown that there was a way to stop addiction. Fourth, the addict's shattered self-image and ego were built up until the addict realized that he had within the self-power to end his addiction. Fifth, the addict voluntarily underwent a cold turkey break with drugs. Sixth, finally cured, now an ex-addict completes the cycle by fishing up other addicts whom he knows and supervising their salvaging. This sixth stage always instantly eliminated what so often defeats the average social agencies, the characteristic addict's hostility and suspicion. The addict who was fished up knew personally that the Muslim approaching him very recently had the same $15 to $30 a day habit. The Muslim may be this addict's buddy. They had plied the same dope jungle. They even may have been thieves together. The addict had seen the Muslim drifting off to sleep leaning against a building, or stepping as high over a matchstick as if it were a dog. And the Muslim approaching the addict uses the same old junkie jungle language. Like the alcoholic, the junkie can never start to cure himself until he recognizes and accepts his true condition. The Muslim sticks like a leech, drumming at his old junkie buddy. You're hooked, man. It might take months before the addict comes to grips with this. The curative program is never really underway until this happens. The next cure phase is the addict's realization of why he takes dope. Still working on his man, right in the old jungle locale, in dives that you wouldn't believe existed, the Muslim often collects audiences of a dozen junkies. They listen only because they know the clean-cut, proud Muslim had earlier been like them. Every addict takes junk to escape something, the Muslim explains. He explains that most black junkies really are trying to narcotize themselves against being a black man in the white man's America. But actually, the Muslim says, the black man taking dope is only helping the white man to prove that the black man is nothing. The Muslim talks confidentially and straight. Daddy, you know I know how you feel. Wasn't I right out here with you? Scratching like a monkey, smelling all bad, living mad, hungry, stealing and running and hiding from Whitey? Man, what's a black man buying Whitey's dope for but to make Whitey richer? Killing yourself. The Muslim can tell when his quarry is ready to be shown that the way for him to quit dope is through joining the Nation of Islam. The addict is brought into the local Muslim restaurant. He may occasionally be exposed to some other social situations, among proud, clean Muslims who show each other mutual affection and respect instead of the familiar hostility of the ghetto streets. For the first time in years, the addict hears himself called genuinely brother, sir, and mister. No one cares about his past. His addiction may casually be mentioned, but if so, it is spoken of as merely an especially tough challenge that he must face. Everyone whom this addict meets is confident that he will kick his habit. As the addict's new image of himself builds, inevitably he begins thinking that he can break the habit. For the first time, he is feeling the effects of black self-pride. That's a powerful combination for a man who has been existing in the mud of society. In fact, once he is motivated, no one can change more completely than the man who has been at the bottom. I call myself the best example of that. Finally, vitally. This addict will decide for himself that he wants to go on cold turkey. This means to endure the physical agonies of abruptly quitting dope. When this time comes, ex-addict Muslims will arrange to spend the necessary days in around-the-clock shifts, attending the addict who intends to purge himself on the way to becoming a Muslim. When the addict's withdrawal sets in, and he is screaming, cursing, and begging, "Just one shot, man!" the Muslims are right there talking junkie jargon to him. "Baby, knock that monkey off your back. Kick that habit. Kick quietly off your back." The addict, writhing in pain, his nose and eyes running, is pouring sweat from head to foot. He's trying to knock his head against the wall, flailing his arms, trying to fight his attendants. He is vomiting, suffering diarrhea. "Don't hold nothing back. Let Whitey go, baby. You're going to stand tall, man. I can see you now in the fruit of Islam." When the awful ordeal is ended, when the grip of dope is broken, the Muslims comfort the weak ex-addict, feeding him soups and broths to get him on his feet again. He will never forget these brothers who stood by him during this time. He will never forget that it was the Nation of Islam's program which rescued him from the special hell of dope. And that black brother, or the sister whom Muslim sisters attend, rarely ever will return to the use of narcotics. Instead, the ex-addict, when he is proud, clean, renewed, can scarcely wait to hit the same junkie jungle he was in to fish out somebody and salvage him. If some white man or approved black man created a narcotics cure program as successful as the one conducted under the aegis of the Muslims, why, there would be government subsidy and praise and spotlights and headlines. But we were attacked instead. Why shouldn't the Muslims be subsidized to save millions of dollars a year for the government and the cities? I don't know what addicts' crimes cost nationally, but it is said to be billions a year in New York City. An estimated $12 million a year is lost to thieves in Harlem alone. An addict doesn't work to supply his habit, which may cost anywhere from $10 to $50 a day. How could he earn that much? No, the addict steals. He hustles in other ways. He preys upon other human beings like a hawk or a vulture, as I did. Very likely he is a school dropout, the same as I was, an army reject, psychologically unsuited to a job even if he was offered one, the same as I was. Women addicts boost, shoplift, or they prostitute themselves. Muslim sisters talk hard to black prostitutes who are struggling to quit using dope in order to qualify morally to become registered Muslims. You are helping the white man to regard your body as a garbage can. Numerous exposés of the Nation of Islam have implied that Mr. Muhammad's followers were chiefly ex-cons and junkies. In the early years, yes, the converts from society's lowest levels were a sizable part of the nation's broad base of membership. Always, Mr. Muhammad instructed us, go after the black man in the mud. Often, he said, those converted made the best Muslims. But gradually, we recruited other black people, the good Christians whom we fished from their churches. Then an increase began in the membership percentage of educated and trained Negroes. For each rally attracted to the local temple a few more of that particular city's so-called middle-class Negroes, the type who previously had scoffed at us black Muslims as demagogues and hate teachers, black racists, and all the rest of the names. The Muslim truths listened to, thought about, reaped for us a growing quota of young black men and women. For those with training and talents, the Nation of Islam had plenty of positions where those abilities were needed. There were some registered Muslims who would never reveal their membership except to other Muslims because of their positions in the white man's world. There were, I know, a few who, because of their positions, were known only to their ministers and to Mr. Elijah Muhammad. In 1961, our nation flourished. Our newspaper, Muhammad Speaks' full back page carried an architect's drawing of a $20 million Islamic center proposed to be built in Chicago. Every Muslim was making personal financial contribution toward the center. It would include a beautiful mosque, school, library, and hospital, and a museum documenting the black man's glorious history. Mr. Muhammad visited the Muslim countries, and upon his return, he directed that we would begin calling our temples mosques. There was a sharp climb now, too, in the number of Muslim-owned small businesses. Our businesses sought to demonstrate to the black people what black people could do for themselves if they would only unify, trade with each other, exclusively where possible, and hire each other, and in so doing keep black money within the black communities just as other minorities did. Recordings of Mr. Muhammad's speeches were now regularly being broadcast across America over small radio stations. In Detroit and Chicago, school-age Muslim children attended our 2 universities of Islam, through high school in Chicago and through junior high in Detroit. Starting from kindergarten, they learned of the black man's glorious history, and from the 3rd grade, they studied the black man's original language, Arabic. Mr. Muhammad's 8 children now were all deeply involved in key capacities in the Nation of Islam. I took a deep personal pride in having had something to do with that, at least in some cases, years before. When Mr. Muhammad had sent me out in his service as a minister, I began to feel it was a shame that his children worked as some of them then did for the white man, in factories, construction work, driving taxis, things like that. I felt that I should work for Mr. Muhammad's family as sincerely as I worked for him. I urged Mr. Muhammad to let me put on a special drive within our few small mosques to raise funds which would enable those of his children working for the white man to be instead employed within our nation. Mr. Muhammad agreed. The special fund drive did prove successful, and his children gradually did begin working for the nation. Emmanuel, the oldest, today runs the dry cleaning plant. Sister Ethel Muhammad Sharif is the Muslim sister's supreme instructor. Her husband, Raymond Sharif, is supreme captain of the Fruit of Islam. Sister Lottie Muhammad supervises the 2 universities of Islam. Nathaniel Muhammad assists Emmanuel in the dry cleaning plant. Herbert Muhammad now publishes Muhammad Speaks, the nation's newspaper that I began. Elijah Muhammad Jr. is the Fruit of Islam Assistant Supreme Captain. Wallace Muhammad was the Philadelphia Mosque minister until finally he was suspended from the nation along with me, for reasons I will go into. The youngest child, Akbar Muhammad, the family student, attends the University of Cairo at El-Azhar. Akbar also has broken with his father. I believe that it was too strenuous a marathon of long speeches that Mr. Muhammad made at our big rallies which abruptly, badly aggravated his long, bothersome, bronchial asthmatic condition. Just in conversation, Mr. Muhammad would suddenly begin coughing, and the coughing temper would increase until it racked his slight body. Mr. Muhammad almost doubled up sometimes. Soon he had to take to his bed. As hard as he tried not to, as deeply as it grieved him, he had to cancel several long-scheduled appearances at big city rallies. Thousands were disappointed to have to hear me instead, or other poor substitutes for Mr. Muhammad in person. Members of the nation were deeply concerned. Doctors recommended a dry climate. The nation bought Mr. Muhammad a home in Phoenix, Arizona. One of the first times I visited Mr. Muhammad there, I stepped off a plane into flashing and whirring cameras until I wondered who was behind me. Then I saw the cameraman's guns. They were from the Arizona Intelligence Division. The wire of our Nation of Islam brought all Muslims the joyful news that the Arizona climate did vastly relieve the messenger's suffering. Since then he has spent most of each year in Phoenix. Despite the fact that Mr. Muhammad, convalescing, could no longer work the daily long hours he had previously worked in Chicago, he was now more than ever burdened with heavy decision-making and administrative duties. In every respect, the nation was expanded both internally and externally. Mr. Muhammad simply could no longer allot as much time as previously to considering and deciding which public speaking, radio, and television requests he felt I should accept, as well as to some organizational matters which I had always brought to him for advice or decision. Mr. Muhammad evidenced the depth of his trust in me. In those areas I have described, he told me to make the decisions myself. He said that my guideline should be whatever I felt was wise, whatever was in the general good interests of our Nation of Islam. Brother Malcolm, I want you to become well known, Mr. Muhammad told me one day, because if you are well known, it will make me better known, he went on. But, Brother Malcolm, there is something you need to know. You will grow to be hated when you become well known, because usually people get jealous of public figures. Nothing that Mr. Muhammad ever said to me was more prophetic. Chapter 15. Icarus. The more places I represented Mr. Muhammad on television and radio and at colleges and elsewhere, the more letters came from people who had heard me. I'd say that 95% of the letters were from white people. Only a few of the letters fell into the Dear Nigger X category or the death threats. Most of my mail exposed to me the white man's 2 major dreads. The first one was his own private belief that God wrathfully is going to destroy this civilization. And the white man's second most pervading dread was his image of the black man entering the body of the white woman. An amazing percentage of the white letter writers agreed entirely with Mr. Muhammad's analysis of the problem, but not with his solution. One odd ambivalence was how some letters, otherwise all but championing Mr. Muhammad, would recoil at the expression, white devils. I tried to explain this in subsequent speeches. Unless we call one white man by name a devil, we are not speaking of any individual white man. We are speaking of the collective white man's historical record. We are speaking of the collective white man's cruelties and evils and greeds that have seen him act like a devil toward the non-white man. Any intelligent, honest, objective person cannot fail to realize that this white man's slave trade and his subsequent devilish actions are directly responsible for not only the presence of this black man in America, but also for the condition in which we find this black man here. You cannot find one black man, I do not care who he is, who has not been personally damaged in some way by the devilish acts of the collective white man. Nearly every day some attack on the black Muslims would appear in some newspapers. Increasingly a focal target was something that I had said, Malcolm X as a demagogue. I would grow furious reading any harsh attack upon Mr. Muhammad. I didn't care what they said about me. Those social workers and sociologists, they tried to take me apart, especially the black ones for some reason. Of course I knew the reason. The white man signed their paychecks. If I wasn't polarizing the community, according to this bunch, I had erroneously appraised the racial picture, or in some statement I had overgeneralized, or when I had made some absolutely true point, Malcolm X conveniently manipulated. Once one of my Mosque 7 Muslim brothers who worked with teenagers in a well-known Harlem community center showed me a confidential report. Some black senior social worker had been given a month off to investigate the black Muslims in the Harlem area. Every paragraph sent me back to the dictionary. I guess that's why I've never forgotten one line about me. Listen to this. The dynamic interstices of the Harlem subculture have been oversimplified and distorted by Malcolm X to meet his own needs. Which of us, I wonder, knew more about that Harlem ghetto subculture? I, who had hustled for years in those streets, or that black snob status symbol educated social worker? But that's not important. What's important, to my way of thinking about it, is that among America's 22 million black people, so relatively few have been lucky enough to attend a college. And here was one of those who had been lucky. Here was, to my way of thinking, one of those educated Negroes who never had understood the true intent or purpose or application of education. Here was one of those stagnant educations, never used except for parading a lot of big words. Do you realize this is one of the major reasons why America's white man has so easily contained and oppressed America's black man? Because until just lately, among the few educated Negroes, scarcely any applied their education, as I am forced to say the white man does, in searching and creative thinking, to further themselves and their own kind in this competitive, materialistic, dog-eat-dog white man's world. For generations, the so-called educated Negroes have led their black brothers by echoing the white man's thinking, which naturally has been to the exploit of white man's advantage. The white man, give him his due, has an extraordinary intelligence, an extraordinary cleverness. His world is full of proof of it. You can't name a thing the white man can't make. You can hardly name a scientific problem he can't solve. Here he is now solving the problems of sending men exploring into outer space and returning them safely to Earth. But in the arena of dealing with human beings, the white man's working intelligence is hobbled. His intelligence will fail him altogether if the humans happen to be non-white. The white man's emotions superseded his intelligence. He will commit against non-whites the most incredible spontaneous emotional acts. So psyche deep is his white superiority complex. Where was the A-bomb dropped? To save American lives. Can the white man be so naive as to think the clear import of this ever will be lost upon the non-white 2/3 of the Earth's population? Before that bomb was dropped, right over here in the United States, what about the 100,000 loyal, naturalized, and native-born Japanese American citizens who were herded into camps behind barbed wire? But how many German-born naturalized Americans were herded behind barbed wire? They were white. Historically, the non-white complexion has evoked and exposed the devil in the very nature of the white man. What else but a controlling, emotional devil so blinded American white intelligence that it couldn't foresee that millions of black slaves, freed, then permitted even limited education, would one day rise up as a terrifying monster within white America's midst? The white man's brains that today explore space should have told the slave master that any slave, if he is educated, will no longer fear his master. History shows that an educated slave always begins to ask, and next demand, equality with his master. Today, in many ways, the black man sees the collective white man in America better than that white man can see himself. And the 22 million blacks realize increasingly that physically, politically, economically, and even to some degree socially, the aroused black man can create a turmoil in white America's vitals, not to mention America's international image. I'd not intended to stray off. I'd been telling how in 1963 I was trying to cope with the white newspaper, radio, and television reporters who were determined to defeat Mr. Muhammad's teachings. I developed a mental image of reporters as human ferrets, steadily sniffing, darting, probing for some way to trick me, somehow to corner me in our interview exchanges. Let some civil rights leader make some statement displeasing to the white public power structure, and the reporters, in an effort to whip him back into line, would try to use me. I'll give an example. I'd get a question like this. Mr. Malcolm X, you've often gone on record as disapproving of the sit-ins and similar Negro protest actions. What is your opinion of the Montgomery boycott that Dr. King is leading? Now, my feeling was that although the civil rights leaders kept attacking us Muslims, still they were black people. Still they were our own kind, and I would be most foolish to let the white man maneuver me against the civil rights movement. When I was asked about the Montgomery boycott, I'd carefully review what led up to it. Mrs. Rosa Parks was riding home on a bus, and at some bus stop the white cracker bus driver ordered Mrs. Parks to get up and give her a seat to some white passenger who had just got on the bus. I'd say, now just imagine that. This good, hard-working, Christian-believing black woman, she's paid her money, she's in her seat, just because she's black, she's asked to get up. I mean, sometimes even for me, it's hard to believe the white man's arrogance. Or I might say, no one will ever know exactly what emotional ingredient made this relatively trivial incident a fuse for those Montgomery Negroes. There had been centuries of the worst kind of outrages against Southern black people, lynchings, rapings, shootings, beatings. But you know, history has been triggered by trivial-seeming incidents. Once a little nobody Indian lawyer was put off a train, and fed up with injustice, he twisted a knot in the British lion's tail. His name was Mahatma Gandhi. Or I might copy a trick I'd seen lawyers use, both in life and on television. It was the way that lawyers would slip in before a jury something otherwise inadmissible. Sometimes I think I really might have made it as a lawyer, as I once told that 8th grade teacher in Mason, Michigan, I wanted to be when he advised me to become a carpenter. I would slide right over the reporter's question to drop into his lap a logical extension, hot potato for him. Well, sir, I see the same boycott reasoning for Negroes asked to join the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Why should we go off to die somewhere to preserve a so-called democracy that gives a white immigrant of one day more than it gives the black man with 400 years of slaving and serving in this country? Whites would prefer 50 local boycotts to having 22 million Negroes start thinking about what I had just said. I don't have to tell you that it never got printed the way I said it. It would be turned inside out if it got printed at all. And I could detect when the white reporters had gotten their heads together. They quit asking me certain questions. If I'd developed a good point, though, I'd bait a hook to get it said when I went on radio or television. I'd seem to slip and mention some recent so-called civil rights advance. You know, where some giant industry had hired 10 showpiece Negroes, some restaurant chain had begun making more money by serving Negroes, some Southern university had enrolled a black freshman without bayonets, like that. When I slipped, the program host would leap on that bait. Ah, indeed, Mr. Malcolm X, you can't deny that's an advance for your race. I jerked the pole then. I can't turn around without hearing about some civil rights advance. White people seem to think the black man ought to be shouting hallelujah. 400 years the white man has had his foot-long knife in the black man's back, and now the white man starts to wiggle the knife out maybe 6 inches. The black man's supposed to be grateful. Why, if the white man jerked the knife out, it's still going to leave a scar. Similarly, just let some mayor or some city council somewhere boast of having no Negro problem. That would get off the newsroom teletypes, and it would soon be jammed right in my face. I'd say they didn't need to tell me where this was, because I knew that all it meant was that relatively very few Negroes were living there. That's true the world over, you know. Take democratic England. When 100,000 black West Indians got there, England stopped the black migration. Finland welcomed a Negro U.S. ambassador. Well, let enough Negroes follow him to Finland. Or in Russia, when Khrushchev was in power, he threatened to cancel the visas of black African students whose anti-discrimination demonstration said to the world, Russia, too.
Context of White Supremacy. We are in Chapter 15. There should be a break between paragraphs, so when we pick back up, it'll say, first sentence, the Deep South white press generally blackballed me out. Or, excuse me, blacked me out. That's what we're picking up at. Anywho, folks would like to participate. The number to dial, 760-569-7664. The code is 564-943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. The number again, 760-569-7676. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you don't want to use your phone to dial in, you can use the free flash phone. Should work anywhere in the world. It's linked on the Black Talk Radio Network page. If you can't access it there, you can put in the following address, which is tiny, tiny.1/1race, and that is the number 1. Address again, tiny, tiny.1/1race, and that is the number 1. When you put in that address, click the link on the left side of the page. It says Flash Player. When you click that, it'll open a small window on your screen. The first line is a drop-down menu. Select the number that I just gave out, which again, 760-569-7676. Next line, it will ask for the code. That code again is 564-943. Last line, it'll ask for a name. You can press random keys, use a nickname, real name, whatever. Once you get all that entered, click the green button at the bottom and it will connect you to the live program. You should be able to hear us. It is the same procedure. If you would like to participate, you'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press star 6. When you do so, you'll hear an audio prompt. Press the number 1. I'll see your hand on the switchboard and we will get you on the line. I will only say I just wrote a submission for Atlanta Black Star, and I just quoted where Minister Malcolm, the speech where he was talking about, I think it's fairly, not fairly, I think it's pretty well known, where he's talking about the white man and white woman sticking a knife in the back of black people and them pulling it out an inch, maybe 2 inches, and calling that progress. Just use that component, even though in the book he doesn't use the term progress when he gives that analogy, but in many of his other speeches where he used that extremely powerful metaphor to describe our situation, he does use the term progress in saying that that is nonsense to be talking about, oh, things are so much better, we've made so much progress in race relations. Just very timely. One of those, I can say again, just being on time with the way things go, because I didn't even know that was coming up in this week's segment. Anywho, everyone who dialed in with a hand up, your line should be open. Feel free to chime in.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Another good reading. I enjoy listening to Farrakhan and Malcolm X, and I think out of all the black leaders or religious leaders in America, they make the most sense. So, I was listening to the book, and they were talking about how black people solely support the Nation of Islam, and it's not white-funded. So when Farrakhan encouraged the use or the reading of Dianetics and Scientology, and then when Scientology built not one, but they have two big centers right on 125th Street in Harlem, which is the main strip, it just was really confusing to me. You know what I mean? Scientology next to everything that's good, that's black up there, just confusing. But then I go back to what you've talked about in the past. Don't follow the movement or the person, follow the logic. So that's what I'm doing, and I still enjoy listening to Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, but I don't have to participate in Scientology and Dianetics, which I feel is white. I don't want to really follow that. Black people can and do recover from drugs and alcohol, despite the limited resources and services they have for us. Once again, they're mainly for white people, and it's interesting because they put all these cheap drugs in our neighborhood. They put the gateway drugs, the marijuana, and right now, black people are struggling. Well, this is what I see. The kids are really struggling with this K2 and these mollies and all these new drugs, but nothing's new about what white people do, putting these drugs in our neighborhood and not, providing any help. So we can and do recover. We can recover on our own with our own support. And I think from all the addicts and alcoholics that I've met, they've started using drugs because of deep emotional issues that happened in their life, their family torn apart, dad not in the home, molestation, incest, all these things, and this is why we use drugs and alcohol to, what the book says, anesthetize ourselves. So I just want to say that we do recover. You don't see it on the news much, but there are plenty of black people who have gotten on the other side of addiction. And that's all I want to say for now. I'll just listen. Thank you.
For sure. Was that misunderstanding? Was that the caller? I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting my names correct. The female caller that just chimed in? Oh, maybe she muted her line. Any of the...
Perseverance from New York. Sorry
okay.
about that.
No worries. Got it. I will get them correct. Any of the other folks who have not shared yet, feel free to chime in as well.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Gus and the callers. I just had one observation. It kind of tails on to something that was mentioned last week in the second half of the reading. Last week he said the narrator read that he said something that Malcolm said that something chemical happened in him every time the white press asked him why he advocated for hate. And this week's reading, with regard to him speaking of new members who were addicted, as the previous caller just mentioned, being helped by the members of the Nation of Islam with regard to overcoming their addictions. The narrator mentioned that the members would tell the addicted person that was joining, kicking Whitey off your back when addicted. Malcolm was saying that kicking Whitey off your back when addicted also produced a chemical reaction, saying that they would begin vomiting, shaking, sweating, having convulsions. And that just reminded me of the previous reading, like I said. And I just wondered if every interaction with white people, even on some sort of ancestral memory level, cellular level, produces some kind of chemical reaction of some time. I think you have a caller, he calls himself 909, who brings that up a lot. It could be a chemical reaction that makes us comply and forgive out of fear of being killed. Chemical reactions that make us fight out of fear of being killed. Chemical reactions with white people that make us passive out of fear of being killed. Or chemical reactions that make us courageous and fearless like Malcolm was, because we know that we are going to be killed and see nothing wrong with sacrificing our lives in exchange for delivering these messages of liberation. That's all I had. I just wanted to focus in on that whole chemical reaction thing. It struck a chord with me. I'll mute my line.
Greetings. Excuse me.
Go right ahead, sir.
Greetings. This particular portion, it appears to go over the inner workings of the Nation of Islam as far as their services are concerned, and also their national event that they have every year. I think it's called Savior's Day. And very interesting. Mr. Fuller speaks about I think he calls it the two different types of organizing. One is four-wallism, and the other one is trying to think of what that other one was. Open air, and he gives the pluses and minuses of four-wallism. The pluses and the minuses behind it. It was profound of his counseling from Mr. Muhammad about the as you grow in getting attention, and I suspect that he was picked out, and this is a tactic that is done by racist white supremacists who are in the people activity of entertainment / media. They will pick out a person, and it was obvious that he was picked out from the late 1950s, early 1960s, as being a figure to put the camera on, so to speak. And in turn, it was very profound on Mr. Muhammad warning him about this attention and how it can possibly become a major problem with him. And that's far as I go. The book will get to that pretty much. Yes. Yeah, with the that's about it as far as I can think about right now, as far as the readings are concerned so far. Yeah, on how I mean with that I have part of that interview where he mentioned that profound statement where he was asked by a I believe it was a white reporter. I could be wrong. And I think it was in New York at the time, about progress, quote unquote. And he quickly cut that reporter off, and he mentioned that phrase that you were talking about, stick a knife in my back 8 inches and pull it out 6 inches and call that progress. He was very, very gifted on being very witty and to think on his feet. And I mean, it's to me, I identify it as a talent. I identify it as a talent. I don't have it, that's for sure. I can tell you that. But that was very profound. That he when he gave that answer to that reporter. It was something else that I was thinking about. Should write stuff down. Anyway, I'll save the rest that I have to say later on. Thank you.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I'm Smith in New York. How's everyone this evening? Another dynamic meeting, another dynamic session. I absolutely love Elijah Muhammad. I think he was a genius. The way he referenced the white people always as the slave master white man, the devil white man. I just think it was so unforgiving. And every time he spoke, he was just gave a blind indictment. And, the one thing I think that his whole agenda was that lacked was that true nationalistic identity. And I think that would have took it to the next level. And I agree with what they said, especially Malcolm, that these white-funded white-funded black organizations are no good. And it seems like they were so far ahead of us today, because I always say the NAACP, the Rainbow Coalition, National Action Network are no good for black people because they're funded by white people, and they're ultimately going to do what white people want done. Anything that they do that benefits black people is actually really going to benefit the white people that fund them. It's just going to look like that. He just gave the nice example how Malcolm did that. They pull a couple of inches out and make more progress, but they've already come up with a solution to get those inches back in. It's just a stage. And the drug program thing, I think that was excellent. I'm not sure if that would have worked during the crack era, but it was excellent for the era that they were in. And that was really my only observation so far.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings to the other callers, listeners. Couple of things that stood out to me during the readings when he was introducing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and how he traveled in his personal jet. And for this particular time, for a black man to be traveling, with these means, was quite an accomplishment. And he was looked upon as almost godlike in Malcolm's eyes, and even in the eyes of a lot of other non-white black individuals. It's ironic that a guy, from a small town in Georgia would, ascend to, those heights. But they mentioned the ministers in the different temples. One of the ministers was a 32nd degree Mason. I thought that was, noteworthy because of the contrast between the Masonic order and then the NOI. And also the fact that they understood that they were under surveillance from the FBI. It was just an everyday thing, to assume that the FBI was monitoring their every moves. And I think that this is a noteworthy book for us to increase our knowledge of white supremacy and the ways supremacists practice their trade. And knowledge is power. And I'll mute my line.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback, or correction, I wanted to tofu back off to what the sister said, something about addiction in relationship to what's being read. Our addiction model was based on the junkie monkey. For some of you old enough to remember, that was usually the camera would zoom in and there would be a cage, and the monkey would be in the cage, and there would be nothing else in the cage. And he would simply self-administer doses. There would be 2 water bottles. One was laced with cocaine or heroin, and the other one was water. And the monkey would prefer to self-administer this drug. And they said, okay, that's addiction. This guy named Bruce Alexander, a psychology, a professor emeritus from Vancouver, British Columbia, he came up with a whole new model, and it goes like this. He filled the cage with other rats, lots of food, cheese, exercise wheels, balls, and so forth. And funny thing, the rats did not prefer the heroin-laced water. In fact, they had an aversion to it. And so the conclusion was that addiction is an adaptation to your environment. And so they sort of blew out of the water that whole thing, the right wing, right brain, hedonistic perpetual partier versus those people susceptible to addiction. So this idea that addiction is an adaptation to your environment, it's a response to versus some of the other models that were used. And I just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Anybody else who has not shared yet? Line should be open. Anybody else? I saw there were other hands. Anybody who hasn't shared yet, your line should be open. Okie dokie. Maybe they are waiting. I'll check back in a second. Few of the observations. The caller that just dialed in, that is an illustration right there of why I generally do not make any comments at the beginning. I allow everybody else to go first. That way I won't step on any points that anybody wants to bring up, because we're supposed to be sharing the point that you brought up about the addiction model that's been given a lot of attention. The new book that this racist suspect published called Chasing the Scream. Dr. Kamal Kamban was very interested in that. He was sending me some links about it. I know he was on Democracy Now! He was on Bill Maher. He was on a talk radio program in South Africa. He's been making the rounds, getting a lot of attention with what you just talked about in terms of substance abuse and drug addiction. He even mentions racism. He talks about Billie Holiday, and that's a twofer because Minister Malcolm mentioned Billie Holiday in the book as well, but talking about the disgraceful racist treatment that she got with regards to her dealing with substance abuse and how it wasn't, let's put her, get her treatment and treating this as a sickness. It was, this is a no good nigger heathen and we're going to put her in a cage and that sort of thing, which is still done 2015. At any rate, some of the other things that stood out during this week's segment, I think one of our callers previously, they were talking about in Spike Lee's movie, they don't illustrate Minister Malcolm getting the teachings of Elijah Muhammad from his family members. They show that he got this from a fellow prisoner. And they were saying that they felt like part of that Hollywood adaptation might have been to continue that narrative that everybody who's in the Nation of Islam is just some, former convict, as opposed to there were a lot of black people who ended up endorsing the teachings and becoming Muslims in the Nation of Islam who had never been to prison and, were upstanding, great citizens. And they just felt that this was constructive to be a part of. The hate, or actually before I get to that, when he brought up the incident where he was talking about if a white reporter tried to go at him and ask him, well, what do you think about the Montgomery bus boycott? Or what do you think about what's happening down there with Dr. King? The incident with Rosa Parks, I just thought it was important. Mr. Fuller has talked about this and some other folks that at that time, white bus drivers, they used to carry a firearm on their hip. So if you disobeyed, didn't follow their directions, they could shoot you dead on the spot, and that would be that. It wouldn't be any investigation. They wouldn't be arrested. It would be stand your ground, kill a black person at will, and too bad. I just thought that was important, and kind of keeping all that in context and talking about what happened with Rosa Parks, black people in general, things that they had to deal with at that time. I also thought it was super, super, super important to just read that again when he's talking about this, when he says they would come and ask him about what other black people were doing. And he said, now, my feeling was that although the civil rights leaders kept attacking Muslims, still they were black people. Still, they were our own kind, and I would be most foolish to let the white man maneuver me against the civil rights movement. Awesome. Something we should keep in mind at all times, not even saying that he agreed with what they were doing, but you have lost your mind if you think I'm going to come out here and stomp on another black person in the white person's press and give them sound bites where I'm talking bad about another black person. That should be repeated every day. That Minister Malcolm had that to say. And again, even though he did do a lot of talking bad about other black people in the press, he did come around and apologize for that before his death and say again that was not constructive to engage in, that whites very skillfully used that just to keep us in conflict and focused on other victims of racism. Anywho, also thought it was important. Dr. King gets a lot of credit, as he should, for speaking against the conflict in Vietnam and pointing that out as another aspect of global white supremacy, which it absolutely was. But I don't hear people credit Minister Malcolm in the same way, and he was doing it like 5 years earlier, which is a step, because nobody was talking against the conflict in Vietnam in like the early 1960s. Dr. King started doing this after 65, but I mean, Minister Malcolm had been doing this for quite some time, and I don't hear as many people mention him as being also someone who was very ahead of the curve in saying this is just another aspect of the global system of white terrorism and what they do to non-white people. It's his comment as well, where he said he would weave in other aspects of his critique of that system when they would ask him about boycotting, and he would say, I see the same boycott reasoning for Negroes as to join the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Why should we go off to die somewhere else to preserve so-called democracy that gives a white immigrant of one day more than it gives the black man with 400 years of slaving and serving his country? I also thought it was significant because we talk about this all the time. Whites network. They talk to each other, particularly when they bump into a victim who is a little bit less confused. Whoa, gotta watch that one, blah, blah, blah. They have their little session, their think tanks and what have you, and re-strategize what they're going to do. I thought it was fantastic that he noted he could detect when white reporters had got their heads together and they would stop asking him certain questions when they knew he was prepared and was going to give dynamite codified response to that sort of question. I also thought it was important because this pops up on a regular basis, people saying that they think white people are dumb and stupid. This is from the mouth of Malcolm X saying the white man, give him his due, has extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary cleverness. His world is full of it. His world is full of proof of it. You can't name a thing the white man can't make. You can hardly name a scientific problem he can't solve. Here he is now solving the problems of sending men exploring into outer space and returning them safely to Earth. But in the arena of dealing with human beings, the white man's working intelligence is hobbled. His intelligence will fail him altogether if the humans happen to be non-white. The white man's emotions superseded his intelligence. He will commit against non-whites the most incredible, spontaneous, emotional acts. So psyche deep is his white superiority complex. I will only add to that, I do not think that it is white ignorance or hobbled white intelligence that is resulting in the continued practice of white supremacy. I think they just use all of that intelligence to continue terrorizing black people in particular. I don't think it's at all a failure, even though absolutely they have emotional outbursts of abusing and terrorizing black people. But I absolutely do not think it's a failure of white intelligence to figure out how to stop racism. It's just they have devoted all of their intellect to continuing to stomp on and keep that knife in the back of black people. One of the other things I wanted to make sure, scrolling back through my notes, the agents thought that was important, that they were intelligent enough to know that whites were spying on them and infiltrating and doing all of that. I thought that was super important as well. They're actually, this will, I guess, be my last comment. This was in, I think he mentioned it, that Alex Haley, did an article for Reader's Digest at the time. It was titled Mr. Muhammad Speaks. You can read that online. It is kind of an interesting read. Some of the portions from that I'll share and then I'll hush. He went to do his research, right? He went to some of the meetings that they were holding to see what was being taught, what was being said, how people were responding. And so he sees all of this, them talking about the white devil and just accurate indictment of what the global white collective has done to black people. And so he writes afterward, Muhammad's words were discussed throughout Harlem, in apartments, along sidewalks, in taverns and restaurants. Exclaimed a retired U.S. Coast Guard steward, what kind of fools sit and hear him run down God? A social worker at her desk, the man is either a gifted opportunist or a psychotic. But for every antagonist, at least 3 defended Muhammad. For example, a woman in her beauty parlor said, Muhammad just talks facts, and white people call it hate. Negroes already got plenty to hate. He's just bringing it out. If they want to stop Muhammad, the quickest way is to stop the Faubus's. That would be Governor Faubus, one of the whites who was practicing racism against non-white people. I believe he was the governor in Arkansas. I'll have to double check. It's got to go further than that, said another. Integrate schools. What have you got? Graduation day, white kids go in one direction and the blacks in another. They know better than to ask for jobs the white kids get. The Constitution says the same thing for all citizens. It just gets twisted when it's us. And still another, you read where some of them Southern churches fire preachers for just talking tolerance. Sunday morning is the most Jim Crow day in this country. It's going to be a bad time in heaven, I think. He goes on from there, but again, that's in Reader's Digest. It was titled Mr. Muhammad Speaks, and it was published in March of 1960. Any other folks? First, did we miss anybody? Anybody with us who hasn't shared yet?
Gus?
We heard from you before, but I don't hear anybody else speaking up. So proceed, sir.
Yeah, if I may, Governor Faubus was the governor of Arkansas during the Little Rock Nine in 1957. And what you said about Billie Holiday was very important. She would sing a song called Strange Fruit, and a lot of people were upset, and this was prior to COINTELPRO, so they actually went after her, and that was just straight-out racism. There was another artist by the name of Eric Dolphy. He played with Charlie Mingus, and he was in Europe performing, and he was a diabetic, and he went into a diabetic seizure, and they thought he was on drugs, and they allowed him to die. And Eric Dolphy played with John Coltrane, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to throw that out there also. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
I could be wrong, but I believe the song "Strange Fruit" ironically was made by a white person.
Yep, accurate.
Yeah, Lillian.
Have you heard?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, my bad.
Oh, I just two more things I had written down I forgot to mention. I think I heard him mention black self-pride, and it reminded me of Dr. Welsing, black self-respect, interchangeable, same thing. And also when he was talking about the black intellectuals and how they adhered to white people's terms, to who told them to wait for things to get better. And that kind of reminded me of the white Jesus ideology. You know, wait for things to get better. Wait for your Savior to come. Same thing. That's all I have. I'll mute my line.
Other comments, folks wanted to make sure they got in. We have about 15 minutes before we get to the next. Go ahead, sir.
Gus, I was listening to your comments, and I totally don't agree. I think that at that time, with the civil rights movement pushing integration, and we see the results of integration, I mean, I just think that's the worst thing ever. And I think that they had the foresight to see what was coming down the line, because in a lot of the Malcolm X speeches I looked at, he was totally against integration. He was about separation. And I just think that he should have went at those leaders who was pushing integration, because obviously they was pushing it for the white foundations and organizations that was funding them. Integration has only benefited white people. And at that time, not this moment. This moment, I totally agree. I come around. I see it makes no use to go around talking bad about other black people. But at that time, with where we were at and what was coming down the line, with the foresight that it seemed like the Nation of Islam had, they should have painted all of those black people as white people. I mean, in my mind, they're going to lead us to a path of destruction. And it's just what happened. We have no more businesses, no more baseball team, no more nothing after integration. I mean, we have no industry, no corporations, really. I mean, it's horrible. And we had stuff before integration. And they were trying to hold on to that. And he saw that these people are leading us down a path of white people owning us again. And he didn't push that point hard enough to get the other black people to see his point. And I just don't agree. At that time, I think he should have went at the civil rights leaders every time he got a chance.
I would only say there is a lot of archive footage of him, quote unquote, going at tons of civil rights. Some of that is coming down the road in the book. Just keep listening. It's coming down.
I know he did.
Hang on. Of him doing that is tons of radio programs, video footage, Roy Wilkins, Dr. King, James Farmer, even individuals who were not a part of what they call the civil rights movement. Lorraine Hansberry, she wrote Raisin in the Sun. She also married a white man, of him doing all that. So I don't know when you say he should have went at them harder. I'm not quite sure in terms of how much more he could have done, but I think he did a lot of that. And there were a lot of black people at that time, not just Minister Malcolm. They did not necessarily want to be in school with white children. They didn't want to be living around white people. They just didn't want to be mistreated. And a lot of them stated that publicly for the record. And I would also say it is not all of the leaders of black people are white. I think that is extremely important to keep in mind when the blame goes out for incorrect things happening, incorrect things being promoted that 50 years down the line are going to harm black people. Whites are to blame. They can do a great job of showcasing and putting black people out in front to make it seem that this is their idea and they are promoting this. At the end of the day, it would still be whites that are to blame. But I would just say I've seen a lot of footage of him doing exactly what you said, fussing at, calling out black people for leading quote unquote integration. I don't know in terms of how much more he could have done, but I think he did a lot of that and later, as I said, apologized for doing so.
May I speak about Spike Lee for a moment and him making this movie? I was privileged enough to have seen 3rd Avenue in Harlem, how he transformed 3rd Avenue, like 125th Street going back and actually some of the 90s into Harlem of the 40s and 50s and 60s, the time period of this book, and even into I guess some spots in Boston. And I have never seen anything like that in my life, and I was privileged to see how Spike did that. I haven't seen anything like that since. I've seen them film Law and Order here in New York, in Harlem, downtown in the courthouse system. There was some movie that just came out that had a 30s period setting, some white movie that came out. I saw them in front of the the Museum of the American Indian in Battery Park. I saw them with a car there and doing some movie there. I've never seen anything like Spike Lee's Malcolm X, how he transformed a piece of this city into the period that he's talking about in that book. And not only should have not Denzel gotten an Oscar for that, Spike should have gotten something for cinematography or set design. It was amazing. Not only that, he hired black people as extras who had no jobs. A couple of my friends were extras in that movie. I never saw them, but they were in the crowds in that scene where he was in front of talking about the young brother getting beat up in front of and been taken to Harlem Hospital, or in some of the other crowds where he was on 125th Street giving his speeches. Spike employed people. He put out lists for people to sign up to come up and be extras, and he paid them, and he took care of them. So I think that we should commend Spike for what he did, and not only just exposing a whole generation of people to this book. That's all I had. I'll mute my line.
I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Lee several months ago. Came down to South Florida, and I personally thanked him for his cinema efforts, his movies, and what the constructive aspects of his movies. So I concur with the lady who just spoke.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Since we're talking about Spike Lee, I guess I'll keep it there. Sorry, my son's asleep. Yeah. Anyway, Spike Lee, he's brilliant. He's a brilliant director, and I believe that white people know how brilliant he is, but they also know us. They also know that we're not collectively supportive. So they can get him to do little things just like with the movie was great. I'm quite sure he couldn't do everything he had to do or everything he could have done, because there's always a Caucasian overseer. There's always somebody funding anything that we do to make sure that it doesn't tell the real tale. And just like with Jungle Fever, Jungle Fever did so much damage. So even though he's a brilliant director, the things that they have him do does a lot of damage to our psyche. With Malcolm X, I don't know how much more he could have done. He really put his all into helping us help ourselves. I don't know how much more he could have done as far as being a little more harder on the blacks about integration. It was convincing. You know, we're trying to get something. I guess we just, because we got so much false hope, we just were hoping that would work. Maybe if we integrate and we show them that they can trust us, we're not the savages that they've been, indoctrinating in our head that we are. Maybe we just show them, because that's basically what a lot of people, I'm going to make you love me. So I think we believed, well, not me, because I wasn't born in that era, but I think collectively black people that were for integration believe that maybe if we do it like this, they'll like us and they'll let us, but we don't know. We didn't know their nature. We didn't know that they're just natural born killers. This is just what they do. This is in their blood. This is how they breathe. You'll never get anything different out of them. Even the goodwill and good intent Caucasians, they're gonna go back home. I don't know. I just don't see if we have to choose them over with us. I got your back. I just don't see it. I just see them saying, good luck. I just don't see, it just doesn't seem like it's in their nature to do anything good. So I don't see how much more, just me thinking since I'm listening to everyone speak, I just didn't see how much more he could have done. And he really did go hard. I watch a lot of documentaries, a lot of old clips that he's done, so many hours worth before and after the incident. And he did a lot. Now, he kind of shifted the way he thought as time progressed, because maybe he realized that black people were victims and they're only going to do so much because they're just beat down. They don't have the strength to fight. It just seemed like, to me, that's just what I got out of it. But I'm glad we're reading the book, because it just brings back a lot, and it just makes me want to work harder, because he did the same thing. He put a lot of energy and effort. He completely, when they did his autopsy, they said Malcolm X had the cleanest inside. Well, the doctor that actually did it, or the person, said he had the cleanest insides of anyone that he had ever seen. So whatever damage he did with the 4 packs of cigarettes, all that stuff, he reversed it, because he reversed the damage. If there did do damage, he reversed it by changing himself and following the teachings and that kind of thing. So I don't know how much more he could have done. Because I know I'm real hard, because it's so much work, and it just seems like we could do more. But then when I look around, it's just like, wow, they make sure they're right there. Nope, no, you're not. Nah, gotcha. It's just, it's like fight to the death, because they're fighting they will kill us. I think about Dr. Cambon, and he had said that black people are very serious about not being very serious. Meanwhile, white people are very serious about playing hardball with us, and the hardball is genocide. They are serious. They're not part-time. This is full-time, overtime, 24/7. And that's it. That's all I wanted to say, and I can mute my line. Thank you.
Gus, there was one small thing that I thought was strange by the reader. I've never heard the Muslim greeting in the way that he pronounced it in the reading. Normally, I hear it as Assalamu alaikum, and the response is Walaikum salam. But he sounded kind of different coming from the reader for some reason. Am I the only one that heard that?
I noted that too. I will say, at least to the version that I have, it matches phonetically what's written in the book that I have, but it is different. That's not the way that it normally sounds when I hear people say it. But I guess I'd have to see it written out. Maybe another way to see if it's if people are just pronouncing it a different way or what have you. But it does phonetically match what's in the book I have.
Okay. I grew up around it. I wasn't a member of the Nation of Islam, but I grew up around it and have heard the greetings, a whole lot, and whatnot from people who were members of the Nation of Islam. And that was one of the few times when I've heard it sound different than what normally is.
Agreed. Caller at 7947, did you want to get something in quickly before we get to the second audio component? (7947), did you have something you wanted to get in, or you just listening?
I'm sorry, I had my thing on mute. I apologize. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Gus. Yes, just piggybacking on what he said about the greeting. The fact that if you listen to the intonation of Malcolm X's voice, you can see he was making fun of it. Like, it wasn't like it was serious, because when he's serious and he says something, he says it in a serious manner. Just from the intonation of his voice made me think to myself, oh, they're saying it in a funny-like way. I know some people from the South say Muslims and not Muslims. That's only because that's the way it's pronounced. But I know the people who he was, I'm just saying, like I said, the intonation of his voice, you could just tell they were just making fun of the greeting. But anyway, I want a quick synopsis here. One of the things that three things that stood out to me was that he said, when you know the enemy, you won't be afraid anymore. Once you learn the enemy, and that's what, you try to teach us, Gus, to be codified. Once we know the enemy's tricks, we'll be ready for them. Secondly, he talked about how there was no plans to integrate us. I think just from my own knowledge and just thinking about the civil rights and up to now, the only thing we truly integrated was our money. That's all we integrated. We integrated more our money into, the white supremacist pockets, making them more rich. But he says that, they have no plans to integrate with us. The only way they integrated us was through integration through raping us, making 1% of black people, 1% of the white blood were still black. And then he talked about, there was a question I'm going to ask you at the end with reference to temple versus how it went to a temple to a mass. I didn't catch all that. Maybe you can educate me on that. And also, he said about, I took so many notes. Maybe that's about how the NAACP and organizations that are actually ran by white people, ran by African Americans, but they're definitely funded. A lot of funding comes from white people, so they really dictate to us what is said. I find that to be so true, because you never really see the NAACP, the Urban League, talk about boycotts. You just never hear that from them. When you talk about a boycott, they don't want to hear about that. Or things that anything to get really, really technical. I don't even think they may even bring up what Yohanan brings up with the Abolition Daily about all these geo groups funding on the stock exchange with the prisoners. They're not going to touch subjects where they're fully funded. So they're going to have their own agenda set and just use the proxy racism, which is that the black person to go ahead and steal what they want to come out. One of the things I was very happy to hear also is that their schools, in first grade, they learn about their history. In third grade, they learn about speaking Arabic, which he said was the African language. I love the fact that they had that type of school going on. He said that 95% of the white people would write him. I'd like to know more about that. And also, he also defined, how he feels about white people, when he calls them devils. He said it's a collective act of white people, what they do, slavery, racism, institutional racism, et cetera, et cetera. It's a collective of records of what they're, a collective agenda, what they have set for us. And like I said, Gus, the question I have for you, I'm just in between things right now. Temple, he said that it was called the temple at one time, then it went to be called the mass. Do you remember what he said? I didn't catch that part. Thank you so much, and I'll move my line.
Yes, ma'am, he did. I think they said that they were transitioning from calling them temples to mosques. I'm digging back to see if I can get the exact verbiage. I will answer that on the other side, just to make sure that we have ample time for folks to respond and get in whatever comments they want. So we will get with the second audio clip. I'll answer your question afterwards. We're in
I appreciate it.
For sure. We're in chapter 15. Already gave you where we're going to be picking up at. So we will catch everyone once this concludes. If you did not get to share something, you had something that you wanted to get in, and just make a note so you don't forget. And anybody who's listening who did not call in, if you had something you wanted to offer, we should have ample time to do so. Context of White Supremacy. This is the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley, chapter 15, Context of White Supremacy.
The Deep South white press generally blacked me out. But they front-paged what I felt about northern white and black freedom riders going south to demonstrate. I called it ridiculous. Their own northern ghettos, right at home, had enough rats and roaches to kill to keep all of the freedom riders busy. I said that ultra-liberal New York had more integration problems than Mississippi. If the northern freedom riders wanted more to do, they could work on the roots of such ghetto evils as the little children out in the streets at midnight, with apartment keys on strings around their necks to let themselves in, and their mothers and fathers drunk, drug addicts, thieves, prostitutes. Or the northern freedom riders could light some fires under northern city halls, unions, and major industries to give more jobs to Negroes to remove so many of them from the relief and welfare rolls, which created laziness and which deteriorated the ghettos into steadily worse places for humans to live. It is all, the absolute truth. But what did I want to say it for? Snakes couldn't have turned on me faster than the liberal. Yes, I will pull off that liberal's halo that he spends such efforts cultivating. The North's liberals have been for so long pointing accusing fingers at the South and getting away with it that they have fits when they are exposed as the world's worst hypocrites. I believe my own life mirrors this hypocrisy. I know nothing about the South. I am a creation of the northern white man and of his hypocritical attitude toward the Negro. The white Southerner was always given his due by Mr. Muhammad. The white Southerner, you can say one thing. He is honest. He bares his teeth to the black man. He tells the black man to his face that Southern whites never will accept phony integration. The Southern white goes further to tell the black man that he means to fight him every inch of the way against even the so-called tokenism. The advantage of this is the Southern black man never has been under any illusions about the opposition he is dealing with. You can say for many Southern white people that, individually, they have been paternalistically helpful to many individual Negroes. But the northern white man, he grins with his teeth, and his mouth has always been full of tricks and lies of equality and integration. When one day all over America a black hand touched the white man's shoulder, and the white man turned, and there stood the Negro saying, "Me too." Why, that northern liberal shrank from that black man with as much guilt and dread as any southern white man. Actually, America's most dangerous and threatening black man is the one who has been kept sealed up by the northerner in the black ghettos, the northern white power structure system to keep talking democracy while keeping the black man out of sight somewhere, around the corner. The word integration was invented by a northern liberal. The word has no real meaning. I ask you, in the racial sense in which it's used so much today, whatever integration is supposed to mean, can it precisely be defined? The truth is that integration is an image. It's a foxy northern liberal smokescreen that confuses the true wants of the American black man. Here in these 50 racist and neo-racist states of North America, this word integration has millions of white people confused and angry, believing wrongly that the black masses want to live mixed up with the white man. That is the case only with the relative handful of these integration-mad Negroes. I'm talking about these token-integrated Negroes who flee from their poor, downtrodden black brothers, from their own self-hate, which is what they're really trying to escape. I'm talking about these Negroes you will see who can't get enough of nuzzling up to the white man. These chosen few Negroes are more white-minded, more anti-black than even the white man is. Human rights. Respect as human beings. That's what America's black masses want. That's the true problem. The black masses want not to be shrunk from as though they are plague-ridden. They want not to be walled up in slums, in the ghettos, like animals. They want to live in an open, free society where they can walk with their heads up like men and women. Few white people realize that many black people today dislike and avoid spending any more time than they must around white people. This integration image, as it is popularly interpreted, has millions of vain, self-exalted white people convinced that black people want to sleep in bed with them, and that's a lie. Or you can't tell the average white man that the Negro man's prime desire isn't to have a white woman. Another lie. Like a black brother recently observed to me, "Look, you ever smell one of them wet?" The black masses prefer the company of their own kind. Why, even these fancy bourgeois Negroes, when they get back home from the fancy integrated cocktail parties, what do but kick off their shoes and talk about those white liberals they just left as if the liberals were dogs, and the white liberals probably do the very same thing. I can't be sure about the whites. I'm never around them in private. But the bourgeois Negroes know I'm not lying. I'm telling it like it is. You never have to worry about me biting my tongue if something I know as truth is on my mind. Raw, naked truth exchanged between the black man and the white man is what a whole lot more of is needed in this country, to clear the air of the racial mirages, cliches, and lies that this country's very atmosphere has been filled with for 400 years. In many communities, especially small communities, white people have created a benevolent image of themselves as having had so much goodwill toward our Negroes. Every time any local Negro begins suddenly letting the local whites know the truth, that the black people are sick of being hind-tit, second-class, disfranchised, that's when you hear uttered so sadly, "Unfortunately now, because of this, our whites of goodwill are starting to turn against the Negroes. It's so regrettable. Progress was being made, but now our communications between the races have broken down." What are they talking about? There never was any communication. Until after World War II, there wasn't a single community in the entire United States where the white man heard from any local Negro leaders the truth of what Negroes felt about the conditions that the white community imposed upon Negroes. You need some proof? Well then, why was it that when Negroes did start revolting across America, virtually all of white America was caught up in surprise and even shock? I would hate to be general of an army as badly informed as the American white man has been about the Negro in this country. This is the situation which permitted Negro combustion to slowly build up to the revolution point without the white man realizing it. All over America, the local Negro leader, in order to survive as a leader, kept reassuring the local white man, in effect, "Everything's all right. Everything's right in hand, boss." When the leader wanted a little something for his people, "Boss, some of the people talking about we sure need a better school, boss." And if the local Negroes hadn't been causing any trouble, the benevolent white man might nod and give them a school, or some jobs. The white men belonging to the power structures in thousands of communities across America know that I'm right. They know that I'm describing what has been the true pattern of communications between the local whites of goodwill and the local Negroes. It has been a pattern created by domineering, ego-ridden whites. Its characteristic design permitted the white man to feel noble about throwing crumbs to the black man, instead of feeling guilty about the local community system of cruelly exploiting Negroes. But I want to tell you something. This pattern, this system that the white man created of teaching Negroes to hide the truth from him behind a facade of grinning, yes-sir bossing, foot shuffling, and head scratching, that system has done the American white man more harm than an invading army would do to him. Why do I say this? Because all this has steadily helped this American white man to build up deep in his psyche absolute conviction that he is superior. And how many communities have thus white men who didn't finish high school regarded condescendingly university-educated local Negro leaders, principals of schools, teachers, doctors, other professionals. The white man system has been imposed upon non-white peoples all over the world. This is exactly the reason why wherever people who are anything but white live in this world today, the white man's governments are finding themselves in deeper and deeper trouble and peril. Let's just face truth. Facts. whether or not the white man of the world is able to face truth and facts about the true reasons for his troubles, that's what essentially will determine whether or not he will now survive. Today we are seeing this revolution of the non-white peoples, who just a few years ago would have frozen in horror if the mighty white nation so much as lifted an eyebrow. What it is, simply, is that black and brown and red and yellow peoples have, after hundreds of years of exploitation and imposed inferiority and general misuse, become, finally, do or die sick and tired of the white man's heel on their necks. How can the white American government figure on selling democracy and brotherhood to non-white peoples if they read and hear every day what's going on right here in America, and see the better than 1,000 words photographs of the American white man denying democracy and brotherhood even to America's native-born non-whites? The world's non-whites know how this Negro here has loved the American white man and slaved for him, tended to him, nursed him. This Negro has jumped into uniform and gone off and died when this America was attacked by enemies, both white and non-white. Such a faithful, loyal non-white as this, and still America bombs him and sets dogs on him and turns fire hoses on him and jails him by the thousands and beats him bloody and inflicts upon him all manner of other crimes. Of course, these things, known and refreshed every day for the rest of the world's non-whites, are a vital factor in these burnings of ambassadors' limousines, these stonings, defilings, and wreckings of embassies and legations, these shouts of "White man, go home," these attacks on white Christian missionaries, and these bombings and tearing down of flags. Is it clear why I have said that the American white man's malignant superiority complex has done him more harm than an invading army? The American black man should be focusing his every effort toward building his own businesses and decent homes for himself. As other ethnic groups have done, let the black people, wherever possible, however possible, patronize their own kind, hire their own kind, and start in those ways to build up the black race's ability to do for itself. That's the only way the American black man is ever going to get respect. One thing the white man never can give the black man is self-respect. The black man never can become independent and recognized as a human being who is truly equal with other human beings until he has what they have, and until he is doing for himself what others are doing for themselves. The black man in the ghettos, for instance, has to start self-correcting his own material, moral, and spiritual defects and evils. The black man needs to start his own program to get rid of drunkenness, drug addiction, prostitution. The black man in America has to lift up his own sense of values. Only a few thousand of Negroes, relatively a very tiny number, are taking any part in integration. Here again, it's those few bourgeois Negroes rushing to throw away their little money in the white man's luxury hotels, his swanky nightclubs, and big, fine, exclusive restaurants. The white people patronizing those places can afford it. But these Negroes you see in those places can't afford it. Certainly most of them can't. Why, what does some Negro, one installment payment away from disaster, look like? Somewhere downtown out to dine, grinning at some head waiter who has more money than the Negro. Those bourgeois Negroes out draping big tablecloth-sized napkins over their knees and ordering quail under glass and stewed snails. Why, Negroes don't even like snails. What they're doing is proving they're integrated. If you want to get right down to the real outcome of this so-called integration, what you've got to arrive at is intermarriage. I'm right with the southern white man who believes that you can't have so-called integration, at least not for long, without intermarriage increasing. And what good is this for anyone? Let's again face reality. In a world as color hostile as this, man or woman, black or white, what do they want with a mate of the other race? Certainly white people have served enough notice of their hostility to any blacks in their families and neighborhoods, and the way most Negroes feel today, a mixed couple probably finds that black families, black communities, are even more hostile than the white ones. So what's bound to face integrated marriages, except being unwelcomed, unwanted, misfits in whichever world they try to live in? What we arrive at is that integration, socially, is no good for either side. Integration ultimately would destroy the white race and destroy the black race. The white man's integrating with black women has already changed the complexion and characteristics of the black race in America. What's been proved by the blacks whose complexions are whiter than many white people? I'm told that there are in America today between 2 and 5 million white Negroes who are passing in white society. Imagine their torture, living in constant fear that some black person they have known might meet and expose them. Imagine every day living a lie. Imagine hearing their own white husbands, their own white wives, even their own white children talking about those Negroes. I would doubt if anyone in America has heard Negroes more bitter against the white man than some of those I have heard. But I will tell you that, without any question, the most bitter anti-white diatribes that I have ever heard have come from passing Negroes, living as whites, among whites, exposed every day to what white people say among themselves regarding Negroes, things that a recognized Negro never would hear. Why, if there was a racial showdown, these Negroes passing within white circles would become the black side's most valuable spy and ally. Europe's brown babies, now young men and women who are starting to marry and produce families of their own, have their experiences throughout their lives, scarred as racial freaks, proved anything positive for integration? Integration is called assimilation if white ethnic groups alone are involved. It's fought against tooth and nail by those who want their heritage preserved. Look at how the Irish threw the English out of Ireland. The Irish knew the English would engulf them. Look at the French Canadians, fanatically fighting to keep their identity. In fact, history's most tragic result of a mixed, therefore diluted and weakened ethnic identity has been experienced by a white ethnic group, the Jew in Germany. He had made greater contributions to Germany than Germans themselves had. Jews had won over half of Germany's Nobel Prizes. Every culture in Germany was led by the Jew. He published the greatest newspaper. Jews were the greatest artists, the greatest poets, composers, stage directors. But those Jews made a fatal mistake, assimilating. From World War I to Hitler's rise, the Jews in Germany had been increasingly intermarrying. Many changed their names, and many took other religions. Their own Jewish religion, their own rich Jewish ethnic and cultural roots, they anesthetized and cut off until they began thinking of themselves as Germans. And the next thing they knew, there was Hitler, rising to power from the beer halls with his emotional Aryan master race theory. And right at hand for a scapegoat was the self-weakened, self-deluded German Jew. Most mysterious is how did those Jews, with all of their brilliant minds, with all of their power in every aspect of Germany's affairs, how did those Jews stand almost as if mesmerized, watching something which did not spring upon them overnight, but which was gradually developed, a monstrous plan for their own murder? Their self-brainwashing had been so complete that not long after, in the gas chambers, a lot of them were still gasping, "It can't be true." If Hitler had conquered the world, as he meant to, that is a shuddery thought for every Jew alive today. The Jew never will forget that lesson. Jewish intelligence eyes watch every neo-Nazi organization. Right after the war, the Jews' Haganah mediating bodies stepped up the long-time negotiations with the British. But this time, the Stern gang was shooting the British. And this time the British acquiesced and helped them to wrest Palestine away from the Arabs, the rightful owners, and then the Jews set up Israel, their own country. The one thing that every race of man in the world respects and understands. Not long ago, the black man in America was fed a dose of another form of the weakening, lulling, and deluding effects of so-called integration. It was that farce on Washington, I call it. The idea of a mass of blacks marching on Washington was originally the brainchild of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, A. Philip Randolph. For 20 or more years, the March on Washington idea had floated around among Negroes, and spontaneously, suddenly now, that idea caught on. Overalled rural Southern Negroes, small-town Negroes, Northern ghetto Negroes, even thousands of previously Uncle Tom Negroes began talking march. Nothing since Joe Louis had so coalesced the masses of Negroes. Groups of Negroes were talking of getting to Washington any way they could, in rickety old cars, on buses, hitchhiking, walking even if they had to. They envisioned thousands of black brothers converging together upon Washington to lie down in the streets, on airport runways, on government lawns, demanding of the Congress and the White House some concrete civil rights action. This was a national bitterness, militant, unorganized, and leaderless. Predominantly it was young Negroes, defiant of whatever might be the consequences, sick and tired of the black man's neck under the white man's heel. The white man had plenty of good reasons for nervous worry. The right spark, some unpredictable emotional chemistry, could set off a black uprising. The government knew that thousands of milling, angry blacks not only could completely disrupt Washington, but they could erupt in Washington. The White House speedily invited in the major civil rights Negro leaders. They were asked to stop the planned march. They truthfully said they hadn't begun it. They had no control over it. The idea was national, spontaneous, unorganized, and leaderless. In other words, it was a black powder keg. Any student of how integration can weaken the black man's movement was about to observe a master lesson. The White House, with the fanfare of international publicity, approved, endorsed, and welcomed a march on Washington. The big civil rights organizations right at this time had been publicly squabbling about donations. The New York Times had broken the story. The NAACP had charged that other agencies' demonstrations, highly publicized, had attracted a major part of the civil rights donations, while the NAACP got left holding the bag, supplying costly bail and legal talent for the other organizations' jailed demonstrators. It was like a movie. The next scene was the Big Six Civil Rights Negro Leaders meeting in New York City with the white head of a big philanthropic agency. They were told that their money wrangling in public was damaging their image, and a reported $800,000 was donated to a United Civil Rights Leadership Council that was quickly organized by the Big Six. Now, what had instantly achieved black unity? The white man's money. What string was attached to the money? Advice. Not only was there this donation, but another comparable sum was promised for some time later on, after the march. Obviously, if all went well. The original angry march in Washington was now about to be entirely changed. Massive international publicity projected the Big Six as March on Washington leaders. It was news to those angry grassroots Negroes steadily adding steam to their march plans. They probably assumed that now those famous leaders were endorsing and joining them. Invited next to join the march were 4 famous white public figures, 1 Catholic, 1 Jew, 1 Protestant, and 1 labor boss. The massive publicity now gently hinted that the Big Ten would supervise the March on Washington's mood and its direction. The 4 white figures began nodding. The word spread fast among so-called liberal Catholics, Jews, Protestants, and Laborites. It was democratic to join this black march, and suddenly the previously march-nervous whites began announcing they were going. It was as if electrical current shot through the ranks of bourgeois Negroes, the very so-called middle class and upper class who had earlier been deploring the march on Washington talk by grassroots Negroes. But white people now were going to march. Why, some downtrodden, jobless, hungry Negro might have gotten trampled. Those integration-mad Negroes practically ran over each other trying to find out where to sign up. The angry blacks' march suddenly had been made chic. Suddenly it had a Kentucky Derby image. For the status seeker, it was a status symbol. Were you there? You can hear that right today. It had become an outing. A picnic. The morning of the march, any rickety carloads of angry, dusty, sweating, small-town Negroes would have gotten lost among the chartered jet planes, railroad cars, and air-conditioned buses. What originally was planned to be an angry riptide, one English newspaper aptly described now as the gentle flood. Talk about integrated, it was like salt and pepper. And by now there wasn't a single logistics aspect uncontrolled. The marchers had been instructed to bring no signs. Signs were provided. They had been told to sing one song, We Shall Overcome. They had been told how to arrive, when, where to arrive, where to assemble, when to start marching, the route to march. First aid stations were strategically located, even where to faint. Yes, I was there. I observed that circus. Who ever heard of angry revolutionists all harmonizing, "We shall overcome some day," while tripping and swaying along arm in arm with the very people they were supposed to be angrily revolting against? Who ever heard of angry revolutionists swinging their bare feet together with their oppressor in lily-pad park pools with gospels and guitars and "I have a dream" speeches? And the black masses in America were, and still are, having a nightmare. These angry revolutionists even followed their final instructions to leave early. With all of those thousands upon thousands of angry revolutionists, so few stayed over that the next morning the Washington Hotel Association reported a costly loss in empty rooms. Hollywood couldn't have topped it. In a subsequent press poll, not one congressman or senator with a previous record of opposition to civil rights said he had changed his views. What did anyone expect? How was a one-day, integrated picnic going to counter-influence these representatives of prejudice rooted deep in the psyche of the American white man for 400 years? The very fact that millions, black and white, believed in this monumental farce is another example of how much this country goes in for the surface glossing over, the escape ruse, surfaces, instead of truly dealing with its deep-rooted problems. What that march on Washington did do was lull Negroes for a while. But inevitably, the black masses started realizing that they had been smoothly hoaxed again by the white man, and inevitably the black man's anger rekindled, deeper than ever, and they began bursting out in different cities in the long, hot summer of 1964, unprecedented racial crises. About a month before the farce on Washington, the New York Times reported me, according to its poll conducted on college and university campuses, as the second most sought-after speaker at colleges and universities. The only speaker ahead of me was Senator Barry Goldwater. I believe that what had generated such college popularity for me was Dr. Lincoln's book, The Black Muslims in America. It had been made required reading in numerous college courses. Then a long, candid interview with me was carried by Playboy magazine, whose circulation on college campuses is the biggest of any magazines. And many students, having studied first the book and then the Playboy interview, wanted to hear in person this so-called fiery black Muslim. When the New York Times poll was published, I'd spoken at well over 50 colleges and universities, like Brown, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Rutgers, in the Ivy League, and others throughout the country. Right now I have invitations from Cornell, Princeton, and probably a dozen others, as soon as my time and their available dates can be scheduled together. Among Negro institutions, I've then been to Atlanta University and Clark College down in Atlanta, to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and to a number of others with small student bodies. Except for all black audiences, I like the college audiences best. The college sessions sometimes ran 2 to 4 hours. They often ran overtime. Challenges, queries, and criticisms were fired at me by the usually objective and always alive and searching minds of undergraduate and graduate students and their faculties. The college sessions never failed to be exhilarating. They never failed in helping me to further my own education. I never experienced one college session that didn't show me ways to improve upon my presentation and defense of Mr. Muhammad's teachings. Sometimes in a panel or debate appearance, I'd find a jam-packed audience to hear me alone, facing 6 or 8 student and faculty scholars, heads of departments such as sociology, psychology, philosophy, history, and religion, and each of them coming at me in his specialty. At the outset, always I'd confront such panels with something such as, "Gentlemen, I finished the 8th grade in Mason, Michigan. My high school was the black ghetto of Roxbury, Massachusetts. My college was in the streets of Harlem, and my master's was taken in prison. Mr. Muhammad has taught me that I never need fear any man's intellect who tries to defend or to justify the white man's criminal record against the non-white man, especially the white man and the black man here in North America." It was like being on a battlefield with intellectual and philosophical bullets. It was an exciting battling with ideas. I got so I could feel my audience's temperaments. I've talked with other public speakers. They agree that this ability is native to any person who has the mass appeal gift, who can get through to and move people. It's a psychic radar. As a doctor with his finger against a pulse is able to feel the heart rate, when I'm up there speaking, I can feel the reaction to what I'm saying. I think I could be speaking blindfolded, and after 5 minutes I could tell you if sitting out there before me was an all-black or an all-white audience. Black audiences and white audiences feel distinguishably different. Black audiences feel warmer. There's almost a musical rhythm for me, even in their silent response. Question and answer periods are another area where, by now, again blindfolded, I can often tell you the ethnic source of a question. The most easily recognizable of these to me are a Jew in any audience situation, and a bourgeois Negro in integrated audiences. My clue to the Jew's question and challenges is that among all other ethnic groups, his expressed thinking, his expressed concerns are the most subjective. And the Jew is usually hypersensitive. I mean, you can't even say Jew without him accusing you of anti-Semitism. I don't care what a Jew is professionally, doctor, merchant, housewife, student, or whatever. First, he or she thinks Jew. Now, of course, I can understand the Jew's hypersensitivity. For 2,000 years, religious and personal prejudice against Jews have been vented and exercised as strong as white prejudices against the non-white. But I know that America's 5.5 million Jews, 2 million of them are concentrated in New York, look at it very practically, whether they know it or not, that all of the bigotry and hatred focused upon the black man keeps off the Jew a lot of heat that will be on him otherwise. For an example of what I'm talking about, in every black ghetto, Jews own the major businesses. Every night, the owners of those businesses go home with that black community's money, which helps the ghetto to stay poor. But I doubt that I have ever uttered this absolute truth before an audience without being hotly challenged and accused by a Jew of anti-Semitism. Why? I will bet that I've told 500 such challenges that Jews as a group would never watch some other minority systematically siphoning out their community's resources without doing something about it. I've told them that if I tell the simple truth, it doesn't mean that I am anti-Semitic. It means merely that I am anti-exploitation. The white liberal may be a little taken aback to know that from all Negro audiences I never have had one challenge, never one question that defended the white man. That has been true even when a lot of those black bourgeoisie and integration-mad Negroes were among the blacks. All Negroes, among themselves, admit the white man's criminal record. They may not know as many details as I do, but they know the general picture. But let me tell you something significant. This very same bourgeois Negro, who, among Negroes, would never make a fool of himself in trying to defend the white man, watch that same Negro in a mixed black and white audience, knowing he's overheard by his beloved Mr. Charlie. Why, you should hear those Negroes attack me, trying to justify or forgive the white man's crimes. These Negroes are people who bring me nearest to breaking one of my principal rules, which is never to let myself become over-emotional and angry. Why, sometimes I've felt I ought to jump down off that stand and get physical with some of those brainwashed white man's tools, parrots, puppets. At the colleges, I've developed some stock put-downs for them. You must be a law student, aren't you? They have to say either yes or no. And I say, I thought you were. You defend this criminal white man harder than he defends his guilty self. One particular university's token integrated black Ph.D. associate professor I never will forget. He got me so mad I couldn't see straight. As badly as our 22 millions of educationally deprived black people need the help of any brains he has, there he was looking like some fly in the buttermilk among white colleagues, and he was trying to eat me up. He was ranting about what a divisive demagogue and what a reverse racist I was. I was racking my head to spear that fool. Finally, I held up my hand, and he stopped. Do you know what white racists call black Ph.D.s? He said something like, I believe that I happen not to be aware of that. You know, one of these ultra-proper talking Negroes. And I laid the word down on him loud. Nigger. Speaking in these colleges and universities was good for the Nation of Islam, I would report to Mr. Muhammad, because the devilish white man's best minds were developed and influenced in the colleges and universities. But for some reason that I could never understand until much later, Mr. Muhammad never really wanted me to speak at these colleges and universities. I was to learn later, from Mr. Muhammad's own sons, that he was envious because he felt unequipped to speak at colleges himself. But nevertheless, in Mr. Muhammad's behalf at this time, I was finding these highly intelligent audiences amazingly open-minded and objective in their receptions of the raw, naked truths that I would tell them. Time and time again, the black, the brown, the red, and the yellow races have witnessed and suffered the white man's small ability to understand the simple notes of the spirit. The white man seems tone-deaf to the total orchestration of humanity. Every day his newspaper's front pages show us the world that he has created. God's wrathful judgment is close upon this white man, stumbling and groping blindly in wickedness and evil and spiritual darkness. Look, remaining today are only two giant white nations, America and Russia, each of them with mistrustful, nervous satellites. America is propping up most of the remaining white world. The French, the Belgians, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and other white nations have weakened steadily as non-white Asians and Africans have recovered their lands. America is subsidizing what is left of the prestige and strength of the once mighty Britain. The sun has set forever on that monocled, pith-helmeted resident colonialist, sipping tea with his delicate lady in the non-white colonies, being systematically robbed of every valuable resource. Britain's superfluous royalty and nobility now exist by charging tourists to inspect the once baronial castles, and by selling memoirs, perfumes, autographs, titles, and even themselves. The whole world knows that the white man cannot survive another war. If either of the two giant white nations pushes the button, white civilization will die. And we see again that not ideologies, but race and color is what binds human beings. Is it accidental that as red Chinese visit African and Asian countries, Russia and America draw steadily closer to each other? The collective white man's history has left the non-white peoples no alternative either, but to draw closer to each other. Characteristically, as always, the devilish white man lacks the moral strength and courage to cast off his arrogance. He wants today to buy friends among the non-whites. He tries characteristically to cover up his past record. He does not possess the humility to admit his guilt, to try and atone for his crimes. The white man has perverted the simple message of love that the prophet Jesus lived and taught when he walked upon this earth. Audiences seemed surprised when I spoke about Jesus. I would explain that we Muslims believe in the prophet Jesus. He was one of the three most important prophets of the religion of Islam, the others being Muhammad and Moses. In Jerusalem there are Muslim shrines built to the prophet Jesus. I would explain that it was our belief that Christianity did not perform what Christ taught. I never failed to cite that even Billy Graham, challenged in Africa, had himself made the distinction. I believe in Christ, not Christianity. I never will forget one little blonde co-ed after I'd spoken at her New England college. She must have caught the next plane behind that one I took to New York. She found the Muslim restaurant in Harlem. I just happened to be there when she came in. Her clothes, her carriage, her accent all showed deep South white breeding and money. At that college I told how the antebellum white slave master even devilishly manipulated his own woman. He convinced her that she was too pure for his base animal instincts. With this noble ruse, he conned his own wife to look away from his obvious preference for the animal black woman. So the delicate mistress sat and watched the plantation's little mongrel-complexioned children, sired obviously by her father, her husband, her brothers, her sons. I said at that college that the guilt of American whites included their knowledge that in hating Negroes they were hating, they were rejecting, they were denying their own blood. Anyway, I'd never seen anyone I ever spoke before more affected than this little white college girl. She demanded, right up in my face, "Don't you believe there are any good white people?" I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I told her, "People's deeds I believe in, miss, not their words." "What can I do?" she exclaimed. I told her, "Nothing." She burst out crying and ran out and up Lenox Avenue and caught a taxi.
Context of White Supremacy. That is where we will pick up next week. Still in chapter 15. I feel like I heard a whole chapter talking about integration. keep listening. I thought I said that. At any rate, the number to dial, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Even broke down that white people came up with the term integration. The number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. To the female caller's question about the switching, going from temples to mosques, the sentence reads, Mr. Muhammad visited the Muslim countries, and upon his return, he directed that we would begin calling our temples mosques. So it would seem traveling and seeing other Muslims and the way that they practice words that they used in their particular religious practice, decided he would adopt some of the same vernacular. So that seems to be what sparked the transition, if I'm understanding correctly. Anywho, all the folks who had a hand up, your line should be open. I will nab the caller at 0748 first, because I don't think we heard from them the last time, and then everybody else, your line should be open if you have comments that you would like to get in. Caller at 0748, 0748, did you have something you wanted to share? Caller at 0748, did you have something you wanted to share, or are you just listening? I'll assume perhaps they are just listening. All the other folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open.
Yes, sir. This time I took some notes, and I have jotted down 6 things about this portion of the reading. First, number one, I would state that Malcolm was able to state the hypocrisy of white people in the northern part of this area in the world that call themselves the Freedom Riders. And also it indicates the danger that whites are responsible for by confusing victims of racist white supremacy to defend these quote unquote nice white people who are willing to get in buses and come down south. And with our Stockholm syndrome, we would fuss and fight with another non-white person about these people as being legitimate, and they actually aren't. But he was able to bring that out. Also, Minister Malcolm had a very good understanding of the word integration as being a very confusing term, something that probably is a word devised to cause confusion, therefore enacting the practice of racism. Number 3, one of Minister Malcolm's greatest attributes was his ability to speak truthfully about racism and white supremacy in public. His private life was a little bit different from what I understand by listening to people who knew him personally, but publicly he was like really on it about the system of racist white supremacy. He was up for the task. He had prepared himself, and even as I mentioned, even with situations where he would arbitrarily be asked a question, he would be ready to answer it in the most codified fashion. Number 4, Malcolm was one of the few non-white speakers in this part of the world when given a mic to speak on the global system of white supremacy. There's a few others that I can recall. One was John Henry Clark, who also was a dear friend of Malcolm X. But Malcolm was very, very precise in speaking about the global system of racist white supremacy. He was speaking on the acts of racist white supremacy over in Africa before it became popular to speak on it. As you mentioned, Vietnam, he spoke on it before most people even know where it was on the map. He was talking about it in the early 1960s. He was talking about it. Number 5, Minister Malcolm pointed out in a speech in detail how the March on Washington was financed and controlled by a few white people. Ironically, right after the march, 4 little black girls were murdered in Birmingham, Alabama by white people at the time to really show the futility of whoever was at that march, who was sincere, how futile it was against the system of racism. White people didn't care anything about it. We're still going to have our business of mistreating you. Basically, was the reaction after that march. And last but not least, number 6, Mr. Muhammad made his version of Islam relevant, I think, to non-white people, non-white black people in this part of the world. And I think, in my opinion, had he not did this, most people wouldn't have accepted it as a quote-unquote something to latch on to by the understanding of racism, what it is and how it works, and also counter-racism blended in with quote-unquote religion. And that's what made it, I think that's what gave it the kick, if you will, for black people to pay attention to it. And that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I remember as a kid, this might be off the subject, but I remember hearing other people, black people, saying that when white people were wet, they smelled like dogs. I know that was brought up in the reading, not about the dogs, but have you ever smelt a white person? So I thought that was interesting. I'm glad to hear that they mentioned A. Philip Randolph, who, you know, white history has just about written out of their history books. You know, he was the first black leader to have a march on Washington in the 40s, way before the Martin Luther King era, so I was glad that he was mentioned. And I remember I recently heard one of Dr. Welsing's older presentations, and she was saying that one thing that the Jewish people have taught us, that despite all of their accomplishments in producing the Einsteins and Freuds and Gershwins, they were still not white, according to what white people considered white, and therefore they were not worthy to live. And that's why, you know, the white people tried to exterminate them. But she said, they're a perfect example of how the global system, white supremacy, works. No matter how many degrees you get, you will never be white. So I just remembered that as it was mentioned in the book. And I just want to point out, and this is just my personal opinion, I think that black people were spiritually based, and I think white people are cerebral. They're very cerebral. They're very into their thinking instead of not their feelings and emotions like we are. And I think that's how they get us a lot of times. And I just mute my line. That's it.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, greetings to Gus the host, listeners, and callers. A few things I picked up on was, I think this was a metaphor when Malcolm was mentioning, I think when he did speeches on the race issue, and he said there would be other black people in the audience that were, I guess, placed there to, I guess, oppose his viewpoints. And he made like a metaphor, I believe, saying that they were like a fly in buttermilk. I envisioned that. I thought that was very interesting. And another one was, he said that there was, I believe, the most anti-white diatribes or views came from people, I guess, who may be classified as non-white, who had less melanin or lighter skin than white people, because they had a lot of close contact with white people behind the scenes. And I'm thinking, knowing how deceptive people who classify themselves as white can be, they may have known. I'm not saying every white person might have known, but there are those who may have known there are non-whites at that time, and maybe even this time, who might think that white people don't know they're non-white, but they'll just, talk about non-white people or black people behind the scenes right in front of them, just to torture them, just to victimize them in a whole nother way. And it just goes to show you how nefarious they can be in different ways. And one last thing was the term, I think he was describing Jews. He said it was a self-diluted Jew, a self-diluted German Jew, I think. And I don't really know what that would have meant, but I thought that was interesting. That's all I really had.
Anybody else who has not shared during the second, following the second audio clip? Anybody else?
Have you heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Just to follow up on what the female caller that was speaking just said, I just thought of this when she was talking about how the spiritual versus the cerebral in the thought patterns, the thinking, comparing the way black people feel and sense versus the way white people are into their own thoughts. And what came to mind to me is the phrase one-track mind, train of thought. And it's like a pattern that leads to destruction with them, whereas we feel and we sense, and Dr. Marimbani goes into that very well in how awesome work Urugu. I just wanted to say that. And with regard to the text, when Malcolm was speaking about how how black people and white people integrate in these high society functions, how when they come together and they act like everything is fine in that room, and drinking and laughing and what have you, and eating. And when they separate, when the Negroes go home, they kick off their shoes and they talk about the white people, and talk really bad about them. And it reminded me of how Dr. Welson always speaks of how we should ask white people to tell us what they talk about while there are no black people present. And just last week, something came to my mind, and I thought, I wonder if they ever think about what we speak about when they are not present. But it doesn't even matter. Who cares? Because, we're not in charge. It doesn't even, why would they even care what we speak about? Because what matters is what they're talking about. They're talking about strategizing. They're talking about what information they have gained from us and how they could use it to further their plans. When he spoke about the marches of the time, rolling Negroes until they get angry again. In my opinion, white people have refined their terrorism so well that that brand of anger that we had has been quelled through the 9 areas of people activity that Mr. Fuller mentioned. So it's not that we don't get angry, it's just that their resistance has so refined itself that it's hard to even separate or even polarize that anger to do something constructive, because just as you had those freedom riders then, we had those same people in the marches with these Black Lives Matter marches. Same thing. You know, these interlopers, these people that, so it's even hard to even separate that anger or focus on that anger or organize that anger for something constructive. That's, to me, in my opinion, that's the difference between now and then. And regarding what he spoke about with the northern whites being more refined in their racism and the southern whites of the time showing you their teeth and letting you know that you was a nigger, like straight up in front of you. There was an interesting report that came out, I think it was yesterday or today, that said New York is number 3 in the nation for having hate groups or white supremacist groups. Number 3 out of every state in the country. A northern state is number 3. So, you know, that kind of makes you a little bit more concerned because, you know, if you're number 3, that means that your neighbors, you know, your co-workers, all these people that, you know, I'm in New York, this could never happen. No, that's not, no. Our schools are the most segregated, and we're number 3 with hate groups. So, that kind of tells you how much the system has progressed. And that's all I had. I'll mute my line. I had some more stuff, but I'll let somebody else speak. I'll mute my line.
That report was in the New York Daily News, probably other places as well, but you can check it out there. It's titled, New York State ranks number 3 in the nation for number of hate groups. And just a general FYI, from this report, it says that the rounding out the top 3, California, Florida, and New Jersey is tied for 3rd. So you only even have one so-called southern state in the top 4 for quote-unquote hate groups. Just throwing that in. Anywho, some of the things that stood out that I thought were significant. Number 1, and it's hugely important. I said this right after the first audio segment that only a few thousand Negroes, relatively a very tiny number, are taking any part in integration. Here again, it is those few bourgeois Negroes rushing to throw away their little money in the white man's luxury hotels, his swanky nightclubs, and big, fine, exclusive restaurants. I said that I think whites have done a very good job of expunging this from history, but you had lots of black people who were saying, we are not really interested in being close to white people. We just don't want to be mistreated. When you have people that are being harmed and victimized, sometimes they'll take any out that's given. So that's what's thrown out. Hey, you can come be amongst the whites, and maybe that will end some of the abuse and mistreatment. We are subject to under white domination. I think some people were just confused and swept up in all that, but that was widely articulated. And you can even go back in the archives, the time that we spent on the Little Rock 9 in Arkansas. They talk about there were a lot of black people saying, man, this is the exact opposite. We have no interest in going to school with whites. Someone mentioned black self-respect. That was right in the text. That's the only way the American black man is ever going to get respect. One thing the white man never can give the black man is self-respect. Right out of Dr. Welsing's mouth. Also, Dr. Welsing, when he talked about so-called Jews and how, quote-unquote, integration mad they were and what happened to them in Nazi Germany, I think she talks about that all the time, saying the high number of intermarriage and everything that happened just before the Holocaust in that area of the world also sounded like it was right out of Dr. Welsing's mouth. He also says every time any local Negro begins suddenly letting local whites know the truth that the black people are sick of being hind-hit, second-class, disenfranchised, that's when you hear, uttered so sadly, unfortunately now because of this, our whites of goodwill are starting to turn against the Negroes. It's so regrettable. Progress was being made, but now our communications between the races have broken down. What are they talking about? There never was any communication. Just thought that was fantastic all the way through. You still hear that today when black people justifiably are upset with the way that we're being terrorized, and it's these race-baiting Negroes, Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and blah, 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 whoever else's name you want to add in there, but that continues to play out even to this day. His critique of the March on Washington, that just add that to what I said during the first discussion section. I still think that is hugely important. He did speeches on that. I think infamously the message to the grassroots towards the end of 1963, just before his split with the Nation of Islam, where he calls out names. I think he devotes about a good 25, 30 minutes to his, in my opinion, brilliant, accurate dissection of the so-called March on Washington. And some years later, after the assassination of Minister Malcolm, James Baldwin even co-signed and kind of begrudgingly said that perhaps Minister Malcolm was correct in his assessment. That's in his book, No Name in the Street, which came out years later, and just talking about all this continued carnage and thinking that some of these whites were good and maybe down to stopping the practice of white supremacy. Really appreciated his commentary on so-called Northern whites as well, and the blatant hypocrisy which continues to this day. Even remembering all the way back to the Civil War, since we're about to have the 150-year anniversary of the conclusion to that conflict, that you had whites in New York who rioted, were killing black people and saying that they were for the Union, not for the niggers. This is in, up north New York. But I really appreciated that, because even today you see, even with Selma, where they talk about Reverend James Reeb, I think he came from Washington, D.C., and Viola Liuzzo, this white woman that came from up north to go down to Selma and was killed, that they do a really good job at making sure that these whites stick out, that really just add to the confusion and throw us off about what it means to be white, and their unending devotion, dedication to the practice of white terrorism, white supremacy. I guess the last part that sticks out, I'll go right to where we ended at, this kind of infamous moment that's in the film, where this white woman comes up and he asks Minister Malcolm, what can she do? And he says, nothing. I think it is telling that this is Minister Malcolm X, and he said that he was worried about hurting her feelings. That right there, in my opinion, speaks volume. That is profound. That this man, this victim of racism, this black male who is notorious for being so courageous, so candid, the white devil this, the white devil that at this time where he's still in that mode of white devil this, white devil that, where he is concerned about hurting this white woman's feelings. At this point, I have not heard him express any reservation about hurting Roy Wilkins' feelings. He publicly talked about him all the time. I think he was kind of known for referencing Roy Wilkins, who at the time was president of the NAACP, as John F. Kennedy's nigger. He would say this all the time, and calling Dr. Martin Luther King and many other black people, calling them Uncle Toms and all that. I never heard him express any reservation or thought about hurting their feelings when he went in with these attacks. I think that speaks volume. That's why I say all the time that I think we really, dramatically underestimate the level of contamination. I think one of our listeners was talking about on a cellular level, the contamination that we have been subjected to for centuries of white terrorism, and how it impacts the way that we think about, the way we feel, our emotions, every level, the way we interact with white people. Even flashing back to what I said when he said that black people that are in sexual relationships with white people don't really respect white people. And I said, I do not believe that. I don't think that's true. I would add that as another piece of evidence, if even at this point where he's still verbalizing and saying publicly all the time, the white devil this, the white devil that he is concerned about hurting this white woman's feelings, that to me further belies that you don't really have a lack of respect for white people. If you really didn't respect them, then you would not be concerned about hurting their feelings at all. That would be the least of your concerns. And if you're about being accurate, candid, honest in speaking about racism, white supremacy, and the fact that he returns to this later on to lament what he said to her. I think that is profound, and it's not a beating up on him. If anything, it's, hey, we have been drastically traumatized. I mean, it is incredible the level of trauma and contamination that we experience as Black people. I think that's something that we should keep in mind for ourselves and other Black people when we, go to talking about other Black people and how we respond to racism, white supremacy. Any other thoughts folks want to get in?
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody did a great summation here. Left me with a few things. One of the things that stood out with me, here it is 2015. He talked about America and Russia and having satellites. And he said that if America would, press the button, bang, and if Russia would press the button, bang, but they don't want to because, I guess, what year are we talking about? Maybe 1963 or something? Are we looking when he made that statement?
That sounds about right.
Okay, so he says that they want to kind of keep the white relationship together or keep the white race preserved. But I'm thinking, fast forwarding, America's supposed to be a more colored or, let's say, watered down society in the year 2030. So I'm wondering whether Russians will feel the same way at that point. Would they be willing to press a button because it's not going to be too many of them over here anyway? I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, when they think about us being, supposed to be, a watered down society by 2030. I like Mr. Malcolm X wit. I like the fact when he was at one of the colleges and he was talking to a Black bourgeoisie, he said, are you a lawyer? And he said, oh, okay. He said, that's why you defend the white man more so than you defend yourself. I thought that was pretty witty of him. And also the fact that, he said, to this other PhD, he said, what does white people call Black people with PhDs? They call them a nigger. And I thought that because he said he was really upset there, but I guess he definitely put him in his place. And another thing, when we come back to thinking about our own businesses, he said one thing about the Jews, he said they were very hypersensitive. And he said the Jewish people basically own businesses in Black communities. And they would take that money and they would, spend it wherever. But he said that he knew for a fact that a Jewish person would not allow Black people to come in their towns and run their economic community. That just definitely would not happen. And he talked about, the need for us to, if we're going to get any respect, we need to start owning our own businesses and doing for self and taking care of ourselves instead of, begging, the white supremacists for money. Also, again, when we talked about in the earlier chapter, everyone, we talked about setting the narrative. When they were having the March on Washington, here we go with they're setting the narrative. What is it going to be? I'm going to pay you, but you got to give me something in return. I got something attached to it, and I'm going to set the narrative to you. You're not going to be able to, you're only going to sing one song, and you're only going to be able to do this, and do that. Here we go with that narrative. It seems like that's just, if anything I learned here is how white people love to set the narrative, Gus and everybody, and I'll mute my line.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, very interesting chapter. You were right. You did get to the nitty gritty. I never knew that. I did read this book when I was very young, but I didn't retain a lot of the information, I guess, but The whole way that the Civil Rights March was set up and everything, wow, I never knew that. So it was like, wow, you know. I had a few comments I wanted to make. One was, you know, I agree with what one of the other callers what he said earlier. You know, there's a form of religion that Elijah Muhammad was able to come up with. It was very appealing to black people. So I went to a Muslim a mosque, cool type of. It was more. I mean, I don't even think they touched the Quran at all. They were just, you know, just pretty much hitting the Bible and just putting their own little spin on it. It was interesting, you know. And I thought that was great. I love how you ended it off with the crying white woman. Yeah, that was excellent because, and I think that he sympathized. And I like how you say that. He did, you know, say that he felt bad for me. He didn't want to hurt her feelings. But don't forget that Malcolm X also, you know, is a little, he had a little tragedy going on earlier. And, you know, I think that's just one of the things can't come back from, you know, you dipped into that milk. Ooh, boy, I think that's just something that you always going to have a little empathy or sympathy for that, you know, when that happens. You know, it doesn't work the same way the other way around. But I just think that kind of played in, you know, maybe for that second he saw that girl he used to sleep with in her and, you know, felt bad. Also, you know, he should have known about how white people smell if he was sleeping with one. He said, oh, yeah, I heard a brother from talk about, you know how they smell when they wet. And I'm thinking, man, you had to know how they smell when they wet. But that was all I had to add. Great show.
Right on. I am going to have to get in 2 cents on that. I mean, I appreciate the honesty and acknowledging, you know, it had been a while since you read this book and didn't remember that portion was in the text. But it's not just this book. And I would even say if you listen to the speech message from the grassroots, and I don't know who's heard it or how recently you've heard it. I just say I'm a bit more familiar with that because I spent some time. We did a whole program on the March on Washington where I read this portion from the book. I played that portion from message from the grassroots. That critique is even more intense than what you got in this book, where he's calling out people, black people, by names, calling them clowns. In that whole spectacle and everything that went down with the March on Washington. And it's not just these 2 illustrations. As I said, he spent a lot of time on that. And I just think, I mean, if we're going to be saying he should have done more, then there should be a lot of research because he did a lot of bashing black people, particularly around this concept of integration and them, you know, leading black people astray with this whole notion. But I definitely appreciate the honesty, and it's tons of that.
What I meant was you should have never forgiven them. Like, you know, this was something, you know, like never let up on that. That should have been something he died with, you know, never forgiven, I mean, for what they did. You know, like that's what I meant by that. Like, you know, you said right before you went off, you know, you talked about how later on he did apologize to those people and forgave them. And I meant, no, absolutely not. Look at what we got today. I grew up in post-integration. So I don't know segregation, but when I look at it from the point that I'm at, you know, it was a lot of brutality on black people, but black people own stuff. You know, I live in probably one of the largest black areas in the whole world, and we don't own nothing. Not even a corner store. So I look at it like that, and for what we lost, you know, I just think that was something that's unforgivable, and he should have never forgiven them, never let up on that message. That's what I'm about.
Oh, okay. We're at the end, but I will end just by saying the same thing I said before. The people that are most to blame are all white. If it's somebody that should not be forgiven, it is whites, because they are, even as he said, even the term integration came from whites, not black people. And I would just caution anyone once we get to the point of saying that black people doing this, unless it's killing another black person unjustly, if it's just what they said or a stance that they took that is unforgivable, I would definitely put some caution down on that, because I think all of us have made some errors along the way in trying to respond to and solve this problem And I definitely would not endorse not forgiving a black person unless we're talking about they killed or raped a black person. If it's just something that they said or a viewpoint they had about racism, that to me sounds like something that should be seriously thought about, given some great reservation. At any rate, we will be back next week. We're still in chapter 15, still in. Oh, and I gotta make sure I get it. I forgot. Thank you, person that mentioned Dr. John Henry Clark. He did a great interview, probably more than one, but the one that's sticking out in my mind, he did a great interview where he was talking about Minister Malcolm X. And he said that they had a relationship that was built on information. And that just struck me as so profound. And I mean, you could tell that he had great regard for Minister Malcolm and what he did, his life and everything. And, you know, I think he did use the term friend in saying that they were friends. But he said specifically, we had a relationship built on information. And just, man, if more black people, if that's the sort of contact that we had about getting constructive information, exchanging constructive information every time that we communicate and have contact, woo, we would be moving at light speed in solving this problem. Just make sure I got that in for Dr. John Henry Clark. There was one person that dialed in. You're kind of late, so if you can be very brief in getting your comment in, proceed. 9085. Did you have a quick comment you wanted to get in, or? Oh, and they just dislodged. Cool in the gang. Again, we'll be back tomorrow. Compensatory call in 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Feel free to chime in. Compensatory call-in, news, workplace racism, updates from some of the reports that people have shared about workplace racism over the past 7 days. Looking forward to hearing the exchange. Thanks, everyone, for contributing, all the folks who called in. I hope it is constructive. We have moved considerably further along in the book than I thought. I thought we were going to have 4 of these left. That might not be the case. I'm not sure, but we are about 3/4 of the way through the book. It looks like there should at least be 3 more before we are all done. But we'll definitely be back next week with session number 8. Again, sobriety would be best under conditions of racism or white supremacy. If you got to consume any alcohol, get to one spot, your residence, stay there. Definitely do not be behind the wheel of a vehicle. I would even caution about being a pedestrian because there's too many incidents where that is the pretense. We thought that this black person was under the influence, so we had to tase them and shoot them 150 times. Get to one spot, stay there. Definitely not in the presence of whites who are consuming alcohol and even other non-white people. If they're going to be non-constructive, destructive, once they're consuming these intoxicants or alcohol, really is a situation that, I mean, we could totally eliminate unnecessary problems. The amount of nonsense that happens as a result of us being under the influence, of being around other people who are under the influence, being in the presence of whites who are under the influence. That's one thing we could totally remove from the table. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. That being said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of racism. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother.
You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.